Chapter 461, Esdeath's Punishment. Esdeath watched in stunned silence as her severed arm knitted itself back together, flesh weaving seamlessly, bone reforming, until it stood whole again. Had the new limb not been unnervingly pale and soft, like a newborn's, she might have dismissed her injury as a trick of the light. She flexed her fingers, noting its current weakness, but knew a period of training would restore its former strength. "A broken arm doesn't suit you," Ethan remarked with a faint smile. Esdeath inclined her head in quiet concession. At his command, Ethan wove a biokinetic force field around her, lifting her gently to her feet. "First things first, let's return to the Imperial capital." He studied her as they moved. The newly crowned emperor had only just taken the throne, his power secured by crafty ministers. Despite Esdeath's string of battlefield triumphs, her rapid rise had always been overshadowed by those ministers eager to claim her victories as their own. In a court where true leadership was a luxury few enjoyed, her influence remained precarious. Pausing at the edge of the clearing, Esdeath squared her shoulders. "My orders are to annihilate the northern tribes, Master." Ethan's eyes gleamed with interest. "And?" Her response hung in the air, a silent promise of blood and retribution as they set off toward the capital. "Of course, I'm simply carrying out your orders," Esdeath replied with a serene smile. She didn't bow to court ministers or concern herself with titles. Her loyalty belonged entirely to her master, Ethan. Before she met him, Esdeath's only purpose had been to lead her troops. Now, every blade she drew and every battle she fought was vengeance for her homeland against the northern invaders. "General Esdeath," her adjutant ventured hesitantly, "are we truly headed straight back to the Imperial capital? Without an official decree from the Emperor, we risk being ambushed." Esdeath waved off his worries as if they were trifles. "It matters not. I am no longer bound by the Emperor's will. My place is alongside my master's command." Her directive was unmistakable. Her forces would remain here. Ethan had given no orders to return the army to the capital. The adjutant's eyes widened in disbelief. "But, General, how can we justify staying?" Esdeath's presence alone had inspired absolute devotion among her soldiers. The notion of their revered general declaring herself solely to another man churned their hearts with equal parts awe and indignation. Yet Esdeath stood firm, dismissing their objections with a single, unwavering glance, and then turned away, every inch the resolute commander. Ethan sat astride the massive, leathery-winged beast as it circled high above the forest. Below them, the world's patchwork of mountains and rivers stretched into the horizon. "Master," Esdeath's voice crackled in his mind, "are we returning on the back of this dangerous creature, or do you intend to travel some other way?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder and gave a casual shrug. "Doesn't matter to me." His superb brain had already scanned his physiology, determining that he'd need at least 100 days basking in this world's sunlight to trigger his next evolutionary leap. After that, he could hop between realms at will. Until then, time was his to spend, and he planned to enjoy himself. Esdeath hesitated for a moment before replying. She wasn't sure what Ethan's true objective was once they reached the Empire. He'd shown no interest in politics or conquest, so she opted for the riskier path. If he did mean to make a dramatic entrance in the Imperial capital, escorting him on a flying beast would certainly turn heads. Truth be told, she secretly relished the prospect. She had long coveted the chance to rival General Bood, her counterpart in the Empire's defense, and Ethan's power could tip the balance in her favor. With a single thought, they might overthrow the throne. The beast's wings beat the air in steady, powerful strokes. From his vantage point on its broad back, Ethan leaned forward and rested his head against Esdeath's shoulder, using her like a makeshift pillow. The subtle link of their minds hummed against his, a warm, comforting pulse that eased the tedium of the flight. Esdeath made no move to protest. In her eyes, the strong had every right to command the weak, and obedience was simply the natural order of things. She settled into silence, content to bear Ethan's weight until the beast set them down at the gates of the Empire. Ethan's presence unnerved her. Esdeath had spent her life surrounded by women. She had never known a man so potent, so dangerously alive. His nearness, almost intimate, set her pulse racing. Every fiber of her being told her this was a man who could overwhelm her, and that sheer possibility thrilled her in ways she'd never imagined. Unable to resist the urge to test his limits, Esdeath struck without warning. In the blink of an eye, she lunged, her fingers aimed like daggers for his neck. Her strength, owned through years of ruthless training, should have been more than enough to take him down. Instead, her fingertips met something unbreakable. The impact rattled her hands so violently that pain seared through her palm and shattered her bones. To her astonishment, Ethan straightened, entirely unfazed. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You virtually crushed my bones, yet I barely felt it, Master." Esdeath clicked her tongue in surprise. He hadn't even needed to draw upon his magic, only the sheer resilience of his body. A ripple of admiration passed through her. This man, this singular creature, was beyond formidable. But, as Death's eyes narrowed, he had attacked her first, with lethal intent. "Nevertheless," she said, her tone icy, "you did try to kill your own master." Ethan lounged against the railing, his posture so relaxed he looked half asleep. As Death regarded him coolly and asked, "So tell me, how would you like to be punished?" He yawned. "Whatever you decide, my lady. I trust your judgment." A slow smile curved her lips. "Very well. I'll summon my mount. We'll see how you fare on the High Wind Eagle." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The High Wind Eagle?" As Death nodded. "A dangerous creature, one of the fastest in the Empire. It can cover thousands of miles in a single day. Think of it as your trial." The moment the huge, silver-feathered beast launched into the clouds, Ethan felt the full force of its speed. Below them, the ocean boiled. Above them, the wind screamed. Yet while Ethan gripped the saddle, steady and unflinching, it was Esdeath who looked pale. "Are you?" Ethan began. "Shh," she hissed, pressing a hand to her forehead. The tips of her ears were already pink. "I'll survive." But by the time the eagle banked and circled toward the imperial capital, Esdeath's composure had crumbled. The incessant thrum of beating wings, the unrelenting surge of wind, it was all too much. She bent over the railing and retched. Ethan slid forward and caught her elbow. "You're airsick," he said gently. She stiffened, embarrassed, but made no rebuttal. He dipped 2 smooth jade spheres, gifts from his mother, into his leather satchel and set them in her trembling hands. Then, with practiced ease, he began to massage her temples, working down her neck and shoulders. His thumbs pressed into the tight muscles there, easing the tension from her body. Esdeath's breathing steadied. The ride grew smoother as he applied his gentle, deliberate technique, careful enough not to jar their flight, firm enough to restore her equilibrium. All the while, the eagle cleaved through clouds so vast it was as if they were at the heart of a storm. When they finally touched down in the imperial capital's outer courtyard, Esdeath straightened and promptly turned about 70 shades of red. Ethan stood beside her, wiping a smear of vomit from her chin with the corner of his cloak. He offered her a small, steady smile. "If this was your idea of punishment," he said, "then I must confess, it wasn't so bad." Esdeath snapped off a stiff salute, her cheeks hot with mortification. "Next time I'll think twice back before suggesting the High Wind Eagle as discipline." Ethan simply chuckled. "Whenever you're ready." He held out a hand to steady her, and together they stepped toward the palace gates, new allies on the eve of a war that would decide Lulin's fate. Ethan hoisted Esdeath high above his head. Though he stood as unyielding as a mountain, the dizzying height still rattled her equilibrium. Thankfully, Esdeath was no ordinary warrior. Even wielding the formidable Tegu, demon god appearance, she'd maintained her physical training, effortlessly executing the Dragon Phoenix beam routine. The notoriously difficult Dragon's Ascent Phoenix's Embrace sequence flowed from her like a gymnast's flourish. "Of course," Ethan said coolly, "this is your punishment." A faint smile curved Esdeath's lips. "And what comes next, Master? Do you plan to storm the palace, slay the young emperor and his ministers, then crown yourself ruler?" Ethan's eyes gleamed with amusement. "There's no rush. I intend to enjoy life as a carefree king for a few days. Besides, whoever said that's my real aim?" "A carefree king's life?" Esdeath echoed, genuine curiosity in her voice. How did he imagine such a thing, living like a pampered child king? Unsurprisingly, news of Esdeath's return to the imperial capital traveled fast, spreading through every intrigued ear before dusk. Chapter 462. Playing Badly. The imperial capital was the largest city in the empire, and its sheer scale defied imagination. Founded by the first emperor, it sprawled over vast plains and rocky outcrops, eclipsing any rival in both the Western Kingdom and the distant island realm. Here, the city rose in broad terraces like a colossal staircase, each level marking a distinct social stratum. The farther you climbed, the greater your status. At the very summit stood the Imperial Palace, a fortress-like enclave walled off from the rest of the metropolis. Much like the Forbidden City of ancient lore, it was truly a city within a city, its high walls guarding halls and courtyards that stretched beyond sight. Late morning sunlight filtered into Minister Ernest's study as a stout messenger bowed before his desk. "General Esdeath has returned," the man announced in a low voice. "There's no word yet on her campaign against the northern invaders." Minister Ernest rubbed his chin, concern shadowing his round face. Esdeath had always been bold in her duties. What could have compelled her to slip back into the capital in such silence? He rose from his chair, steeling himself to uncover the truth behind her mysterious return. Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Esdeath's endless northern campaigns. Each time she marched back from the frontier, the barbarian tribes lay slaughtered in her wake. Those raiders never gave up. Year after year, they poured across the border. But Esdeath, one of the Empire's legendary twin pillars, always crushed them. Tens of thousands fell every time she struck. By now, well over 100,000 enemy warriors had been wiped out. There was no way a foreign horde could ever beat her. That certainty made the silence from her headquarters all the more impossible to explain. Ethan had even sent an assassination squad to gather information, yet not a single report had returned. With no news and no clues, he found himself grasping at shadows. In a moment of frustration, he blurted out to the young emperor that Esdeath herself had come back to the capital. The announcement left the boy utterly stunned. Ethan sat alone in the Imperial Library, a stack of dispatches unopened before him. Ever since General Esdeath marched north, weeks had passed without a report, an absence that gnawed at the young emperor's confidence. At last he rose and summoned his chief minister, Ernest. "Minister," Ethan began, voice tight with concern, "what news from the front? Has the war taken a turn for the worse? Has the enemy broken through our lines?" Ernest hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I'm not aware of any official bulletin since the general's departure. In fact, Esdeath has not left his estate since returning from his last skirmish. May I send for him? A direct report might put all our minds at ease." Ethan nodded gravely. "Do it. If the situation on the northern front is as troubled as it seems, I will hold General Esdeath responsible." With a curt motion, he dismissed Ernest, who hurried off to dispatch royal messengers across the city. Meanwhile, in a secluded wing of the palace grounds, General Esdeath was already deep in consultation, only not with the court officers seeking him, but with Ethan himself. When the emperor finally arrived 2 hours later, he found Esdeath standing over a spread of maps and correspondence, his posture as rigid as the drawn lines marking their defenses. They spoke in low tones of Jade Mountain Fortress, its walls breached by the enemy and its garrison lost without hope of relief. On the maps, Ethan's finger traced the advance toward the Crystal Plateau, where their last stronghold trembled under mounting pressure. Strategy gave way to confidences shared only between sovereign and soldier, memories of victories past, the weight of command, and the bond their trust had forged. By the end of their 2-day tete-a-tete, the general had shed the fatigue of the campaign. Where once lay grim determination, now there gleamed a renewed fire. Esdeath moved with the ease of a man unburdened, as if he'd rediscovered the joy in his duty. Ethan watched, impressed by this transformation in the warrior he both led and admired. As Esdeath prepared to depart, Ethan offered a wry smile and quoted an old saying he'd once heard in the northern provinces. "I know nothing of fleeting comforts, but a clear body and a steadfast heart are treasure enough." The general returned the smile with a curt nod, then stepped out into the dawn, ready to reclaim what had been lost. A tiny creature had just hatched from the dumpling's thin skin, squirming and twisting in frantic loops. "General Esdeath," came the respectful announcement from her aide. "Her Majesty the Empress and the Council request your presence at the palace." Esdeath, leaning back on the chaise where Ethan lounged at her side, glanced at him with mild curiosity. He was idly tracing patterns on the silk of her gown, utterly at ease. "My lord," she asked, "what shall we do?" Ethan yawned. "Let's go to the palace. You're still officially a general of the Empire, and that title does have its advantages." He rose, sunlight glancing off his unblemished skin as he slipped from the room. Esdeath didn't bother to follow immediately. She knew he'd vanished to soak up rays in the courtyard again. She would have laughed if she weren't so fascinated. Over the last 2 days, she'd probed every inch of him for weaknesses, yet found nothing. In places where an ordinary man would have been mortally wounded, Ethan remained as unharmed as if he wore iron armor. Even without his uncanny abilities, she was certain his raw strength would overpower her. With a smirk, she rose and prepared to join him. After all, a general of the Empire mustn't keep the Empress waiting. Esdeath paced the length of her private chambers, her mind restless. She was desperate to learn how Ethan had attained such extraordinary power, but each time she'd asked him to share his secret, he'd given her nothing but a vague, "not yet." All she could do was wait. If Ethan wasn't ready to grant her that strength, there was nothing she could do to force the issue. At last she pushed the thought aside, switched into her crisp military uniform, and set out for the palace. Minister Ernest and the young emperor were already waiting, but there was no need for Esdeath to enter the main audience hall. If the war grew dire, the fewer people who knew the details, the better. Loose lips could spell disaster for the entire empire, and Ernest was nothing if not cautious. She found them in a small anteroom, lit by morning sun filtering through latticed windows. With a smooth motion, she drew to a halt before the emperor's seat. "Your Majesty," she announced, inclining her head. Instead of dropping to both knees, she settled into a single knee bow, half formal, half commanding. The protocols had shifted beneath her feet. She answered now to Ethan first, the little emperor second. Yet neither the emperor nor Minister Ernest batted an eye at this subtle change. Even if Ernest minded, he understood better than most that strength brings its own privileges, and Esdeath had more than enough of that. The throne room was impossibly still as the young emperor rose from his seat, concern etched on his boyish face. "General Esdeath," he began, voice wavering slightly, "may I ask why you've returned to the capital so suddenly? Has the northern campaign run into trouble?" Esdeath stood before him in full regalia, her expression unreadable. "Your Majesty, the war in the north is progressing precisely as planned. My return is on account of personal, rather private matters." "Private matters?" The emperor's brow furrowed. This was the first time he had ever heard the formidable general speak so plainly of her own affairs. For a woman who rarely disobeyed an order, abandoning the front lines for personal reasons seemed almost reckless. Esdeath inclined her head ever so slightly. "Yes, Your Majesty." A heavy sigh escaped the young emperor's lips as relief washed over him. It wasn't just the fear of a faltering war that had troubled him. Though General Esdeath had repelled every northern incursion, the enemy remained a stubborn threat. Before her rise to prominence, the empire had always found itself on the defensive. And there was the matter of Najexatun's betrayal, fueled by outrage over Esdeath's brutal campaign against the northern tribes, an act the foreign statesman condemned as unjust. One had to wonder if he'd ever asked the people living on the empire's frontier what they thought of their so-called foreign neighbors. "Is there anything the empire can do to help?" the young emperor asked, his concern for his generals plain in his voice. "No, Your Majesty," Esdeath replied, offering a composed smile. She glanced discreetly at Ethan, his expression unreadable, and decided it wasn't the moment to pry into his thoughts. "If you need funding or supplies," the emperor continued, "you need only ask Minister Ernest. I trust he'll see to it immediately." Esdeath inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Majesty, and thank you, Minister." Ernest bowed. "At your service, General. Should you require anything at all, please don't hesitate to call on me." Chapter 463, Ice Monsters in the Far North. "Rest assured, Your Majesty, I will settle my personal affairs myself. I don't need Minister Ernest's help." Esdeath's tone was cool and unyielding. The young emperor opened his mouth, then closed it again. Minister Ernest frowned but said nothing. Esdeath was true to her word. Still, Ernest ordered a discreet scout to follow her movements, and he couldn't shake his worry about the Northern Assassination Squad, from whom no word had come. Later, Esdeath strode from the palace gates back to her manor. In the courtyard, she found Ethan stretched out on a stone bench, face turned skyward as he soaked in the weak winter sun. "You're back," he said without opening his eyes. She offered a faint nod. "Yes." Ethan rose smoothly to his feet. Despite knowing his name, she was still addressed as my lady, a reminder of the bond that bound him to her service. "We leave at dawn," she announced. "Pack your gear. We're heading to the far north to hunt the Ice Phoenix." He cocked one eyebrow. "The Ice Phoenix? Why pursue it now?" Esdeath's gaze sharpened. "My imperial weapon, demon god manifestation, devil's essence, was forged from the heart crystals of those creatures. There's only a handful of them in the world. We need more material before someone else claims it." Ethan met her eyes, his breath misting in the cold air. He might be her retainer, but his loyalty was as steadfast as the frozen wastes they were about to cross. And so, under the pale winter sky, Master and Guardian prepared to pursue one of the realm's rarest and most dangerous beasts. In the world of Jontong, there is no magic, only blood and steel. Yet the Empire's finest weapons and armors wield powers so extraordinary they might as well be enchanted. How is this possible? The secret lies in the materials used to forge them. The bones, hides, and organs of the realm's most dangerous creatures. By incorporating these legendary superspecies elements, Imperial equipment can replicate or even surpass the innate abilities of those fearsome beasts. Imagine a sword that cuts through iron as easily as a great worm slashes through timber, or armor so resilient it shrugs off the crushing jaws of a car-sized predator. Such marvels aren't the product of spells or sorcery, but of raw, primeval power drawn directly from the world's apex predators. Dangerous species in Jontong are ranked according to the threat they pose. 5th level, common wild beasts encountered throughout the land, wolves, boars, giant eagles, and the like. 4th level, creatures that resemble ordinary fauna in appearance, but exhibit extraordinary strength, speed, or resilience. Massive dire wolves, colossal raptors, and armored pachyderms, for example. 3rd level, monstrous entities the size of a carriage, capable of feats no mortal could match. Their roars shake the earth, their claws rend stone, and their hide deflects the strongest steel. By harvesting and refining these materials, Imperial smiths have essentially created a new breed of enchanted weaponry, though their power stems not from arcane incantations, but from the terrifying, untamed force of the world's most lethal creatures. Ethan paused in front of the holo display, reviewing the standardized threat classifications he'd committed to memory. In this world, life forms were ranked not simply by size or ferocity, but by the sheer scope of the devastation they could unleash, and by the rare powers they wielded. 1. First-level dangerous species. These creatures are the stuff of legend, colossal dragons whose very breath can level an entire town. Their strength and resilience make them terrifying adversaries, but their numbers are few. 2. Second-level dangerous species. This tier includes the fabled Asia-Pacific dragon clans, King Kong-scale apes, and a host of other high-fantasy monsters. Individually powerful, they can lay waste to small cities if left unchecked. 3. Special dangerous species. Often relegated to mini-boss status, these beasts are still massive, think Ately, egged behemoths or horned brutes, and wield elemental or psychic abilities. They pose grave risks to unprepared adventuring parties. 4. Super dangerous species. The true apex predators of the wilderness. Legends claim these creatures can single-handedly obliterate military outposts. Their scarcity only heightens their menace. 5. Super special dangerous species, a unique category reserved for entities born of ancient myths, Nephilim, phoenixes, world serpents. Their defining trait is a bizarre cross-species intelligence, a telepathic instinct that allows them to negotiate alliances, manipulate other monsters, even turn former foes against each other. Ethan tapped a note on the side of the display. Imperial weapons are forged from the bones, scales, or blood of super and super special species. He scrolled down to the entry on Esdeath's legendary armament. Esdeath's blood-type Imperial weapon ranks above all others. Forged from the preserved ichor of a super special creature native to the far north, it was once contained in a massive iron cauldron. Any mortal who dared drink that lifeblood succumbed to madness, save for Esdeath herself. The crimson stain etched into her chest is the mark of the pact she sealed with that ancient beast. In battle, her weapon grants her absolute mastery over ice. She can freeze moisture in the air to form razor-sharp lances, erect crystalline fortresses in an instant, or unleash a storm of hail that shatters steel. Its offensive and defensive capabilities move at blinding speed, its power enough to fell an entire army. No other Imperial weapon approaches its might. Ethan leaned back, already calculating how best to prepare his team for the inevitable confrontation with anyone, beast or wielder, who dared to challenge the Empire's icy sovereign. Ethan leaned forward, absorbing every word of the Imperial dossier spread out before him. Super dangerous species, the report explained, were classified by threat level. The lowest tier, creatures like the black marlin, were simply hunted to extinction. Their organs, infused with latent power, were harvested and forged into Imperial weapons for frontline commanders. But the truly formidable beasts belong to a higher order, the legendary super dangerous species. Take the cross-tailed dragon of the East China Sea, sometimes called the cloud dragon. It soars in the misty heights above the waves, a creature of myth and nightmare. Even the first emperor's vast armies could not fell it. All he managed to claim was a single hair, an infinitesimal trophy infused with the dragon's immeasurable vitality. From that hair he had fashioned the imperial weapon known as the Thousand-Change Crosstail, famed for its ability to resist spatial cuts, what scholars call the boundary cut line, and sever the very threads of a world line. Then there was Esdeath, the monstrous ice spirit of the far north, a being so primal and powerful that the first emperor had to lead his legions into the frozen wastes just to drive her back. They wounded her, drew off a vial of her blood, and forged it into another imperial weapon, one that could unleash blizzards at the wielder's command. But as Ethan flipped through the dossier's last pages, a chill ran down his spine. The notes were clear. Any human who wields blood-forged artifacts of this kind risks irreversible change. Esdeath herself had become a hybrid, part ice monster, part human. No longer one or the other, she existed between worlds, an irreversible testament to the hubris of those who dare to tame the untamable. In this world, the line between humans and dangerous species has all but vanished. Hybrids walk among us, and no creature remains truly isolated. Esdeath's fearsome reputation doesn't stem solely from her innate talent or rigorous training. It's also because she is, in truth, a super dangerous species masquerading as a human. Yet she is not unique. Another woman matches her power, proving there is always someone to measure yourself against. When Esdeath came of age, she rose to the top of the Empire's military might by mastering the Imperial arsenal. Her rival, by contrast, rules the shadows as head of an elite assassin organization. Now Ethan proposes a bold gambit. Locate the legendary ice beast, slay it, and transfer its raw power to Esdeath. See if she can surpass her already astonishing limits. After 1,000 years, the ice beast is said to endure in icy seclusion. Don't you crave greater strength? Ethan asks, leaning forward. When the former emperor failed to kill the ice beast, he managed only to harvest a drop of its blood. But what if you could claim its full, unadulterated power? How unstoppable would you become? Esdeath's breath catches. In all her years of conquest, she'd never dared to dream that far. Emotion flickers across her face as she considers the possibility. Ethan's strength grew with every drop of blood he consumed. If he managed to slay the ice monster, just imagine how much more powerful he'd become. With that thought burning in their minds, he and Esdeath wordlessly mounted the specially trained dangerous beast and took to the skies. Ernest, who'd just ordered scouts to keep an eye on Esdeath, could only gape at the scene unfolding before him. "What is that woman up to now?" he muttered in disbelief. Their flight path led due north, straight toward the far north, rather than back to the familiar front lines. Even this beast's formidable speed began to wane as the temperature plummeted. A creature born for milder climates, it shivered and slowed under the biting cold. Worse still was the oppressive aura that enveloped the horizon, the unmistakable, territorial presence of an apex predator warning all intruders to stay away. Had Esdeath not been in command, the beast would have turned tail and fled long before reaching this forsaken wilderness. "It's useless." Esdeath stamped her boot into the frozen earth. "Here it comes." Ethan narrowed his eyes at the horizon. "What is that?" Esdeath followed his gaze. Towering against the sky was a colossal phoenix, wrought from ice crystals, its vast wings blotting out the sun. A blast of frigid air roared from the creature's plumage, sweeping over them like a living glacier. In an instant, the special dangerous species they'd been tracking was encased in solid ice and crashed headlong into the ground. Ethan staggered backward, his breath catching in his throat. Such intense cold. Even Esdieth, mistress of frost, felt her ice magic pale in comparison to the bone-piercing chill emanating from the phoenix. The raw power of that freezing aura reminded them both just how formidable this crystalline beast truly was. Chapter 464, Night of Esdeath. Master, let me be the first to try it. Esdeath stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Confronting a powerful opponent was exactly the sort of challenge that thrilled her. Whether she could defeat it or not was beside the point. She simply wanted to prove herself. Ethan gave her a wry smile. Are you sure? This ability was granted by our enemy. It may have built-in limitations you can't foresee. His casual tone did nothing to shake her confidence. All the better. I want to face it myself and master its power. Very well, Ethan agreed, nodding. Without hesitation, Esdeath leapt gracefully from the beast's back. She never commanded anything of her subordinates that she wouldn't do herself, a fact that earned her both respect and a hint of awe. As she landed before the creature, its reaction was unexpected. It folded its massive wings and fixed her with a silent, watchful stare. Under the morning light, Esdeath studied the beast's extraordinary form. It wasn't armed with just 2 wings, but 4, 2 pairs layered like a double set of sails. The forewings sprouted from its arms, curling around its shoulders in a harpy-like fashion, while the hind wings jutted from its haunches just like a traditional dragon's. Each limb ended in a pair of razor-sharp talons, icy crystals clinging to their edges. This hybrid anatomy was both beautiful and terrifying, and it only fueled Esdeath's resolve to conquer it. The ice monster's sudden hesitation was understandable. It sensed the pulse of its own bloodline stirring within Esdeath. After surviving countless millennia, this apex predator wasn't about to mistake her for its cub. No creature so ancient and cunning could be fooled by such a ruse. Over the centuries, even the dullest bird grows wise. How much more so a super-dangerous species capable of forging mental bonds with humans? Esdeath felt the creature's telepathic probe and replied instantly with a war cry of her own. In response, the ice monster condensed the swirling frost into a hail of razor-sharp spikes, unleashing a howling blizzard toward her. So this is what it's like to face one's own power, Esdeath murmured, lips curling into a cold smile. In a heartbeat, she erected a crystalline shield of ice. Crack, crack, crack! Jagged shards slammed against her barrier like thunderbolts. Esdeath's defense held firm, for now, but she knew that even the strongest ice wall could be torn apart by a master Tegu user. Against weapons like Suzanu's Amazon Cloud Sword or Akahomi's legendary Slash, such a shield would shatter without mercy. Esdeath felt the lingering chill of the ice demonic beast's spikes, just as a voice drifted through the howling winds. Esdeath, mind if I teach you a few tricks? She whirled around. There stood Ethan, his figure barely outlined by the swirling snow. How had he slipped through the raging blizzard without her noticing? And more baffling, how had he gotten behind her in the heart of this polar tempest? Her interest piqued. She needed to see exactly what he was capable of. I've been studying your ice techniques, Ethan said evenly. I think I can help you refine them, if you're open to learning. Esdeath met his gaze, a faint smile playing at her lips. The challenge thrilled her, even if mastering it would be no easy task. Very well, she said. Show me. She lifted her hands, fingertips touching in a precise arc, palms facing inward as she gathered her power. Ice coalesced in the tiny space between her palms, shimmering like fractured glass. With a sudden explosive surge, the frozen ground cracked, sending jagged pillars of ice shooting skyward, and then the dragon appeared. A colossal serpent of frost burst from the earth, its scales thick with snow and icicles. At first, its form was rough-hewn, an unshaped block of living ice, but under Esdeath's relentless control, the creature flexed its massive limbs, rearing back and letting out a bone-chilling roar that echoed across the blizzard's roar. Wings of layered ice unfurled, each beat sending fine snow drifting through the air, and the fully realized ice dragon towered over them, a testament to Esdeath's power and to Ethan's unexpected guidance. Esdeath's control over her constructs was absolute. If she could marshal entire legions of Ice Knights with precision, commanding a single ice dragon was nothing. She glanced at Ethan, a challenge dancing in her pale blue eyes. "Let me see what you've got," she called to the ice worm at her side. In an instant, Esdeath's dragon surged forward. The hulking ice titan paused, then ascended into the bitter air. Drawing in the cold around it, the monster mirrored her maneuver. A perfect ice-forged twin of her dragon formed on the frozen ground, spikes of glacier jutting from its neck and wings. With a roar like cracking ice sheets, the doppelganger lunged, shredding toward Esdeath's mount. The two beasts collided, talons and teeth interlocking as their massive bodies writhed in a deadly grapple. Esdeath watched, intrigued. "It's actually learning my technique," she murmured. She studied the monster's movements closely. It's no dumb animal. Its intelligence rivals that of many humans, and its affinity for ice magic, it's frighteningly transparent. I can predict its next move almost as soon as it makes it. Ethan grinned, excitement in his breath. Then let's give it something new to learn. A thrill ran through Esdeath. Out here in the far north, she drew power from the land itself. No strain, no limits. With a swift motion, she pressed her palm against the snow-crusted ground. "Rise, my knight!" Light flared at her touch, dancing across the ice as ancient runes glowed beneath the snow. The earth trembled, and a colossal ice knight shattered free from the frozen soil. Towering above them, its armor gleamed like a shard of winter sunlight. Esdeath leapt up, settling astride one shoulder. Ethan clambered onto the other. Together, they poised themselves for the next strike against the learning, adapting monster before them. Esdeath's eyes glittered with anticipation as the massive ice beast loomed before her. "Unleash Susanoo," she ordered, voice calm but authoritative. In an instant, a colossus of ice-forged steel answered her call, a towering knight clad in faceted crystal armor, every plate carved with runes of power. Some whispered it was Obelisk's Titan soldier, a guardian capable of cleaving mountains in two. Its broad sword, known in legend as the Mountain Slasher, rested across one gauntleted shoulder, the blade so wide that it seemed to drink in the light around it, leaving shards of frost swirling in its wake. Ethan watched with a bemused smile. "Susanoo, huh?" he quipped under his breath. Despite the knight's grandeur, he knew better than to expect mythic deities on a war-torn field. Still, even at half the size the legends claimed, the sentinel radiated raw, unearthly strength. Before them, the ice monster spread its 4 crystalline wings wide, each membrane gleaming like frozen lightning. Its talons, sharp enough to rend steel, and the frigid aura pulsing from its form, spoke of ancient magic and boundless cruelty. A soft rumble echoed from deep within its throat as it bent low, ready to strike. Esdeath shifted her stance, the knight at her side matching her every movement with mechanical precision. The mountain slasher hummed with icy energy, sending tendrils of cold air dancing across the frost-bitten ground. Esdeath met the beast's challenge with a steely grin. "Show me your strength," she murmured. With a deafening roar, the ice monstrosity lunged, and Susanoo swung its colossal blade. The impact split the frozen earth beneath them in a thunderous shockwave, as man-made might and primordial frost clashed in a battle that would shake the very foundations of the mountain pass. Sir Ethan braced himself as the colossal ice monster struck first. With a thunderous roar, the beast opened its cavernous maw and unleashed a swirling blizzard. Jagged shards of ice and a biting chill roared toward him like a frozen tidal wave. Clutching the mountain-slashing sword in both hands, Ethan met the storm head-on. His blade carved through the raging winds, each powerful arc colliding with the blizzard in a deafening clash. Ice and snow exploded outward in shimmering clouds, casting pale light across the desolate far north plains. The unleashed fury was unlike anything the region had ever seen. Lingering frost devoured every living creature in its path, uprooting hardy shrubs and freezing beasts to extinction. Even the hardiest predators fell silent beneath the monster's relentless gale. Yet despite its fearsome might, the ice monster found itself thwarted at every turn. Summoned by Esdeath and wielding the cold himself, Ethan's armor glinted like polished steel, shrugging off bone-chilling blasts. With each swing of his greatsword, he shattered the beast's frigid onslaught before it could take shape. Hour after hour, storm met steel in a battle of equals. Neither the monster's icy breath nor Ethan's relentless determination could claim victory. As the swirling tempest raged around them, both adversaries paused for but a heartbeat, each knowing this was only the beginning. Esdeath's eyes gleamed with anticipation. She thrived on combat and savored every moment of facing a powerful opponent. Chapter 465, Kill with One Punch. Ethan stood at the edge of the frozen plain, his breath misting in the frigid air as he watched Death masterfully direct the massive ice knight before her. "Your control is impressive," he called out, admiration clear in his voice. "Being able to command something that large without a hitch, that's no small feat." Esdeath's pale eyes flicked toward him, a confident smile curling at her lips. "Naturally," she replied coolly. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she sent her armored creation sweeping into battle again. Across the field, the ice beast bellowed, a thunderous, wrath-filled roar that shook the ground. Its great wings unfurled, whipping up a blizzard of razor-sharp snow and ice. Without hesitation, Esdeath maneuvered the knight forward, its mighty frame cutting through the storm like a living glacier. "Break!" she ordered, voice steely. The knight obeyed instantly, driving its colossal mountain cleaver sword into the beast's outstretched wing. The clash rang out like a cannon blast, shards of ice spraying in every direction as a shockwave rippled across the snowy plain. Yet the ice beast refused to yield. It surged forward, claws scraping at the frozen earth, fury burning in its icy eyes. Esdeath's lips curved into a determined smile. "Again," she commanded. With a roar of its own, the knight raised the mountain cleaver sword high and brought it down in a sweeping arc, the air itself groaning under the blade's power. Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon, anticipation surging through him. This duel, between Esdeath's unshakable control and the beast's raw elemental wrath, was far from over, and either way, the outcome would echo across the frozen wastes. Bang! Ethan's mountain-slashing sword met the ice beast's thick, crystalline hide with a thunderous clang. The monstrous creature recoiled several meters, and Ethan staggered back under the force of his own blow, yet he held fast. From her vantage point, Esdeath's pale eyebrows rose in mild surprise. The ice beast certainly was formidable, but cracks were spidering across its icy armor under Ethan's relentless assault. She could almost feel its brittle core giving way. "So this is the strength of a single knight," she murmured, intrigue glinting in her eyes. "Impressive, but let's see how you fare against two." With a graceful wave of her arms, Esdeath summoned frost from the air. Swirling shards coalesced into a second ice knight beside the first, two towering warriors of glimmering blue-white armor, each brandishing a sword forged from pure ice. The ice beast snarled in defiance, beating its massive wings to whip up a hailstorm. It lunged at the newcomers, but its attention was split. Even as it fought back, Ethan steeled himself for the next challenge. In unison, the twin ice knights advanced on Ethan from both flanks. Their frosted blades gleamed as they struck simultaneously, aiming to overwhelm him in a pincer assault. Ethan tightened his grip on his sword, feet planting firmly in the frozen ground. He raised his blade to parry the first blow, and then spun to meet the second, determined to prove that one knight could stand against a legion of ice. Ethan's two ice knights pressed the attack relentlessly, hammering the monstrous ice beast with shattering blows. Though the creature's size and strength were intimidating, each of Ethan's commands infused his constructs with unstoppable force. Under their onslaught, the beast began to slow, its movements growing sluggish, its retaliatory strikes losing momentum. Ethan allowed himself a cold smile. "Is that really all you've got?" He raised his gauntleted hand, ready to deliver the finishing blow when the ice beast let out a roar that rattled the frozen ground. In an instant, its form swelled to nearly twice its original size. Layers of thick, jagged ice rippled across its hide, bolstering its defenses. At the same time, its claws and fangs glowed with lethal energy, and its renewed attacks came with blinding speed. Ethan's knights lashed out, but their swords ski dead harmlessly off the beast's reinforced armor. He staggered back, heart pounding. "Impossible," he whispered. What had seemed like a decisive victory had just slipped through his fingers. As the ice beast advanced with newfound ferocity, Ethan knew he would need every ounce of skill and a new strategy if he hoped to survive. Esdeath's voice rang out, icy and unwavering. I see now that I underestimated you. A sharp light danced in her eyes. She knew she had to shatter the ice beast's defenses before the battle slipped out of her control. Gathering all her strength, she drove the two ice knights into a furious assault. But each blow she landed simply chipped the creature's surface. Its frosty armor held firm, refusing to yield. The ice beast's own counterstrikes grew ever more brutal. One powerful sweep of its clawed wing nearly crushed an ice knight into shards of crystal. Esdeath's jaw tightened. Damn it, she thought. This isn't working, and if it goes on, we'll lose. With a deafening roar, the beast flexed its massive wings, drawing every ounce of power into them. A single, thunderous beat sent a vortex of ice and snow swirling across the frozen field. In that instant, the creature transcended mere monstrosity. It became a living tempest of frost, an unending gale. Moisture in the air froze at once, coalescing into gargantuan hailstones that crashed down in hurricane-force showers. The once clear battlefield disappeared under a roaring storm of ice, and Esdeath knew the true test had only just begun. The sky tore open with a roar of ice. Hailstones, each as massive as those in Esdeath's famed Hail Fury Leap, plummeted like frozen meteors, hundreds, thousands of them, turning the battlefield into a blizzard of destruction. It wasn't merely a hailstorm, it was an ice-bound meteor shower, capable of burying entire regiments beneath sheets of lethal frost. Esdeath's heart skipped. She'd faced fearsome foes before, but she had never witnessed the ice monster wield such power. The first wave of jagged ice shards crashed into the two ice knights at the front, shattering their armor and hurling them lifeless to the ground. With each thunderous impact, shockwaves rippled outward, strong enough to crush bone and rip apart internal organs before the victim even had a chance to cry out. She sprang back, narrowly avoiding a colossal icicle that slammed into the frozen earth with a force that sent chunks of ice flying like shrapnel. Just as another glacial projectile threatened to obliterate her, a powerful grip wrapped around her waist and swept them both upward in a single, fluid motion. Air whipped past her as she found herself clinging to Ethan's broad shoulders. The hailstone struck the ground below with a deafening crack, sending a plume of ice spray skyward. Dazed but unharmed, Esdeath stared at him in disbelief. You can fly?" she managed, her voice a mixture of relief and astonishment. Ethan leveled a calm, almost amused gaze at her. "Is it so strange?" She shook her head, snowflakes spinning around them. "In all my years, I've never met anyone who could take to the skies like that. Flight is a rare gift, especially this far north." He offered a wry smile. "Then I suppose I'm something of an oddity." His expression hardened as he peered down at the chaos below. "But oddities can be deadly too. Hold on tight, Esdeath. It's time to finish this fight." The Northern Empire doesn't even have an air force, just a handful of precious airships cobbled together from its Navy's engineering corps. You can imagine, then, how rare and valuable those vessels are. Ethan squared his shoulders and looked up at the glacier-like monstrosity drifting above them. "You're no match for that ice beast," he called. "Let's finish this." With surprising swiftness, he drew back his fist and struck through the air. In that instant, an invisible force rippled outward as if an unseen giant were throwing a punch alongside him. Cracks spidered across the monster's crystalline hide. Boom! The shockwaves slammed the creature into the frozen ground, shattering the permafrost in 100 directions. The very earth beneath their feet trembled. Even from a distance, Esdeath's eyes went wide. How had Ethan managed to bring down an ice colossus with a single blow? When the monster's fragments finally settled, Ethan and Esdeath found themselves kneeling in the wreckage. Ethan brushed snow off his coat and whispered, "Its real power lies in its heart. That's what you need." He'd used his enhanced vision and a touch of clairvoyance to map the beast's anatomy down to its atomic lattice. He understood its structure better than the creature did itself. Esdeath rose to her feet and approached the shattered remains of the ice monster, determination in her step. She knew exactly where to strike. Chapter 466, Ultimate Esdeath. Ethan's punch shattered the ancient ice monster in an instant, sending shards of crystalline armor flying. With its defenses broken, Esdeath knelt beside the beast's massive frozen heart. Amid the fractured ice, a section gleamed with a deep, dreamy blue light. She drew her ice knife and carefully scraped away the outer layers until a fist-sized sapphire-like crystal emerged, pulsing with otherworldly frost. "Is this the source of its power?" Esdeath whispered, cradling the glowing gem in her palm. She tilted it back and forth, frost dust drifting off its facets. Unsure how to harness this raw power, she paused. "Just eat it," Ethan's calm voice replied from behind. Esdeath froze, her body tensing at the sound of him so near. She turned to find his steady gaze on her. "You really want me to? Eat it raw?" Without another word, Ethan stepped forward and pressed the crystal gently to her lips. The moment the gem touched her mouth, she couldn't resist. She bit down. A surge of icy energy flooded her veins, amplifying her own frost powers and binding her to the ancient heart's essence. As the last shard dissolved on her tongue, Esdeath felt an exhilarating rush. The legacy of the millennia-old ice monster coursed through her, and a new, limitless power awakened within her soul. Ethan watched in stunned silence as Esdeath's lips parted, and then, impossibly, the sapphire slid into her mouth as though pulled by an invisible force. The gem was unnaturally large. There was no way it should have fit. Esdeath froze, her eyes wide. Almost at once, a biting chill erupted from her body. Her skin took on an ethereal blue glow, and her long hair whipped around her like a living thing. The air itself seemed to crackle with ice, frost coalescing on every surface in a rolling wave. Where that frigid wind passed, moisture froze instantly. Glass turned to shards, footprints to shimmering crystal. Ethan realized what was happening. Esdeath had just triggered her bloodline's ultimate power, the ice beast's core. This was the distilled essence of a creature born millennia ago, its strength and ferocity accumulated over countless hunts and battles. Now, as Esdeath's body reached out to draw that power in, she was actually struggling against the core's ancient, violent will. He knew how difficult it was to absorb such primal force. Even the most intelligent beast was driven first and foremost by instinct, by the urge to kill, to survive, to dominate. Wisdom might flicker in its mind, but it was fleeting, always overshadowed by that relentless urge. Esdeath's transformation accelerated. Crystalline spikes of frost sprouted along her arms and shoulders, and a palpable aura of cold radiated from her. She gasped, her breath visible in billowing clouds, as her entire form shimmered with an otherworldly blue light. Ethan took a cautious step forward. "Esdeath," he called softly, though the roar of cracking ice made it hard to hear. "It's me, Ethan. You have to hold on." Her eyes, now icy blue orbs, flicked in his direction. For a moment, there was only the roaring storm of her unleashed bloodline. Then, the gem in her mouth pulsed, and the wild energy receded, collapsing inward like a storm that suddenly exhausts itself. The glow around her dimmed, and the frost retreated back into veil-thin mist. Esdeath staggered, her knees buckling under the sudden absence of that terrible power. Ethan caught her, steadying her before she could collapse. She looked up at him, her face pale but her eyes clearing once more. "Enough," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She spat the sapphire from between her lips. It clattered to the floor, still glowing faintly in the dim light. Ethan knelt beside her, gently brushing a lock of blue hair from her face. "You did it," he said quietly. "You controlled it." Esdeath managed a wry, fatigued smile. "If I hadn't, we might all be trapped in an endless glacier." He helped her to her feet. Around them, the frost melted away under the warming lamps, leaving cracked tiles and frost-bitten debris. But most important was that Esdeath stood with him, no longer the ice beast's slave, but its master once more. Ethan slipped the sapphire into a protective pouch at his belt. "Let's get out of here," he suggested. "We have a lot to discuss, and I need to know where that power came from in the first place." Esdeath nodded. Though her strength was still shaken, her determination burned bright. Together they stepped forward, leaving the echo of cracking ice behind them, and forging a fragile new alliance in the aftermath of unleashed power. Esdeath knelt beside the colossal figure, its stone-cold form as motionless as it had been for centuries. That stillness spoke volumes. Its mind, too, had long since frozen. It showed no curiosity toward the ever-shifting stars, no impulse to seek out others of its kind, not even the most basic drive to reproduce. A sudden lancing pain cracked through Esdeath's skull. In her mind, a terrible presence stirred, a monstrous hunger unlike anything she'd ever known. Kill it, eat it, crush it, devour it. The commands hammered at her sanity, each shout more frenzied than the last. A tidal wave of bloodlust and unreasoning rage threatened to overwhelm her. She'd tasted something similar when she first absorbed the devil's essence, but this was far more violent, far more insidious. It whispered that she was nothing more than a vessel to be shattered, her identity drowned in a sea of ravenous fury. If she failed, she would not just die. She would become a mindless, ice-cold juggernaut, a monster in human shape. Ah! 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 The scream tore from her throat, ragged and inhuman. Black energy coalesced around her like living ink, crackling and seething with malevolent intent. Esdeath's entire body felt as if it might split apart beneath its savage weight, and all she could do was fight to keep herself from being consumed. Ethan's intervention came just in time. The ice beast's power had already begun to seep into Esdeath's very flesh, threatening to consume her entirely. A cruel, mocking laughter rang in her mind. Heh, is that the best you can do? Such feeble strength won't be enough to break me. For a moment, that invasive consciousness surged forward, only to be halted abruptly when a massive hand closed around its ethereal form. Esdeath seized the opening. Second-rate power? She scoffed. It would take far more than this to erode me. She glanced at Ethan, whose raw force had already shown its world-shattering potential. In comparison, the ice beast's attempts at mental domination were trivial. Lesser souls might quail before such a primeval entity, but Esdeath had learned long ago that true terror lay elsewhere, in the man who could fell the ice beast with a single, decisive blow. At her command, the telltale rune on her chest dissolved, like shackles snapping free. The last link binding her bloodline to the beast vanished in an instant. No longer its vessel, she stood unchained. From this moment on, she was simply Esdeath, master of her own fate. Once Esdeath's shackles fell away, her long hair whipped around her like living steel. A wave of frost radiated outward, blanketing thousands of miles in an instant. No longer did she need days or nights to forge her Ice Knight or summon an empire-spanning blizzard. Now, she commanded a limitless, surging cold with mere thought. In that moment, power swirled through her veins, and she felt truly omnipotent. Then she caught sight of Ethan standing at her side. Instinctively, her limbs trembled, and for the first time in ages, uncertainty flickered in her heart. But she would not falter. Clenching her teeth, she lunged at him. "Master, be careful! I can't control myself," she cried, an unhinged gleam in her eye as jagged ice formed at her fingertips. Ethan stepped forward with a calm smile. "Is that so? Then allow me to help you control it." Esdeath recognized the understanding in his gaze, and secretly, she welcomed it. She had cried out for caution, only to save herself from feeling the full force of his next punch. Et had understood exactly why Esdeath had challenged him, and he didn't mind her taunts, even if their power play threatened to shatter the Far North's crust altogether. By fusing the ice monster's core energy with her own formidable will, Esdeath had tapped into a far more terrifying facet of ice magic, grasping its very essence. "Absolute freezing air," she declared. Of all the techniques Ethan had taught her, this one was perfect, a breath attack that chased the theoretical limit of absolute zero. Drawing in a lungful of bitter cold, Esdeath concentrated the chill until the air around her collapsed into near-infinite frost. Then, with a mighty exhale, she unleashed an ice-blue beam that arced through the sky like a frozen rainbow, ready to encase anything in its path. Chapter 467, The Devastating Explosion. A prismatic beam of icy blue light tore through the air, freezing everything in its path and dragging time itself into a crawl. The effect rivaled even Esdeath's legendary Mahabottom, her ultimate freezing technique. Under the influence of that absolute cold, anyone nearby, struck or not, found their movements slowed to a near halt. Neither the flow of time nor the bounds of space offered any refuge. Unless one could literally step outside reality, Esdeath's powers were inescapable. But Ethan simply exhaled. A blast of scorching air roared from his lungs, instantly igniting on contact with the atmosphere into a blazing inferno. He didn't stop there. The fire compressed upon itself until its temperature soared beyond any earthly flame, transforming into searing plasma. It was as if he wielded his very own atomic breath. Yet this was no miracle of science, but one facet of his super-breathing ability. While some might master freezing breaths to freeze foes solid, Ethan's specialty was the opposite. A scorching breath so hot it transcended the limits of ordinary gas. The battlefield crackled with the contrast of absolute cold against blistering heat. Space remained locked in ice wherever the frosty beam had swept, but at its edge, Ethan's plasma blast cut through with furious intensity. Time, once slowed by Esdeath's power, began to snap back as the two opposing forces collided, and in that instant, the air itself seemed to shudder. Neither technique could dominate forever. The outcome would hinge on which force, blistering heat or absolute cold, would claim supremacy. Ethan unleashed a blast of superheated air so fierce it reached hundreds of millions of degrees, while across the field Esdeath inhaled deeply, summoning her absolute zero breath. Even if Susanoo were in its full liberation form, it would stand no chance against the biting cold she commanded. The instant their powers collided, the result was nothing short of cataclysmic. Around them, the atmosphere seemed to lose all substance. Air itself thinned and throbbed with energy. Where Ethan's fiery torrents met Esdeath's glacial winds, a spiraling vortex ripped to existence, its walls twisting like a miniature tornado. Brilliant arcs of light danced along the rim, ionization sparks born of gas compressed and superheated, then slammed against bone-chilling frost in the blink of an eye. Inside that churning funnel, fire and ice clashed in a lethal contest. Ethan's 100-million-degree inferno scorched the frigid air, trying to raise it past its boiling point on an instant, while Esdeath's absolute cold sought to drag his flames below their freezing threshold. The result was a chain reaction of physical and chemical extremes. Vapors hissed and crackled as molecules ripped apart and recombined, each side striving to overwhelm the other. In that brief, violent moment, the very laws of nature trembled under their onslaught. Fire and ice, heat and cold, waged a battle so intense that every spark, every snowflake, and every wisp of steam bore witness to the raw power Ethan and Esdeath had unleashed, and to the world-shaking consequences that would follow. Ethan stood at the edge of the battlefield, heart pounding as the air itself seemed to come alive. An abrupt spike in temperature had set the surrounding gas molecules into furious motion, each one trembling violently under the combined heat and crushing pressure. In that instant, their chemical bonds, to all appearances fragile, began to shudder and stretch until they snapped open, primed for reaction. Where those molecules collided, ionization flared. Brilliant veins of electric light streaked through the haze like jagged lightning, flooding the clearing with a harsh spectral glow. Within that dazzling electric field, thousands of free electrons and charged ions danced together, forging a glowing plasma that rippled through the air in shimmering waves. Then came the shock wave. In a fraction of a second, roaring energy erupted outward. The force hammered the ground and tore through the atmosphere, driving air molecules together so violently that temperature and pressure soared still higher at the wave's front. Following it, an unrelenting clap of sound crashed across the plains, a deafening roar that rolled and crashed like the heavens themselves colliding. Even creatures huddled far beyond the far north's frozen wastes trembled at that thunderous boom. And in the heart of the battlefield, Ethan braced himself, feeling every rumble in his bones. The very sky seemed to shake around him, as though the world were being remade in that single explosive moment. The clash between ice and fire unleashed a staggering surge of energy so great that it reshaped not only the immediate atmosphere, but sent ripples through the surrounding climate. Temperatures in and around the impact zone swung wildly, rising or plunging in moments. Such abrupt shifts threatened to upend the local ecosystem, stressing flora and fauna unaccustomed to sudden extremes. As the power of the collision gradually dissipated, the air itself seemed to shimmer. Traces of light and shadow flickered in fleeting patterns, an optical afterimage born of wildly agitated gas molecules colliding and vibrating at supersonic speeds. Those iridescent wisps danced and twisted before fading, a breathtaking coda to the titanic struggle between elemental forces. Ethan watched the display intently, his enhanced mind, his superbrain, simultaneously cataloging every chemical reaction and physical disturbance. Cross-referencing the data against his records of Earth's atmospheric behavior, he noted significant discrepancies. But given the alien environment, the differences were expected. Still, Each variance promised fresh insight into how ice and fire behave when pitted against one another under these strange skies. In general, the energy released by colliding gas clouds can be comparable to the detonation of thousands or even tens of thousands of tons of TNT. Of course, that's only a rough estimate. The actual yield depends heavily on the gas's composition, temperature, pressure, and countless other variables. Ethan knew this in theory, but nothing could have prepared him for the raw force he and Esdeath had just unleashed. Esdeath's signature killer move should have been unstoppable. Yet somehow Ethan had cracked it, and in response, her own attack backfired. Both energies erupted in a titanic explosion, their combined output rivaling a natural disaster. The shock wave tore across the far north, wiping out everything in its path. When their energies collided, they birthed a blinding beam of light that sliced through the sky. It was so intense that you couldn't look at it directly. At its heart, a swirling vortex of chaotic energy churned like a storm. Tendrils of power lashed outward, setting the air ablaze and transforming the landscape into a sea of fire. In the end, the continent itself was gone, reduced to ash and ruin by the sheer magnitude of that cataclysmic clash. A deafening crack split the air, and seawater poured through the rift as if the world itself were rupturing. The chasm yawned like a gateway to another realm, radiating an alien terror. Far above, the planet trembled from the backlash of two colliding forces, so violently that it felt as though everything might collapse at any moment. "Is this my power?" Ethan breathed, staring in astonishment at the empty void where the far north had just been. His eyes flitted down to his arms, where faint ripples of energy still danced across his skin. Esdeath's gaze lingered on the vanished continent. There was no panic in her expression, only awed fascination. At Ethan's side, she wrapped a steady arm around his waist and murmured, "You're overthinking it." When our attacks met, they triggered an extreme physical reaction, and a chemical one at that. The result is more powerful than either of us predicted. Ethan pressed closer, voice low with concern. "But what does that mean for me?" She took a steadying breath, as if drawing strength from the very air around them. "It means you've only scratched the surface of your potential. Don't be afraid of what you're capable of." Determined, Ethan turned his attention to the task at hand. They needed to track the hyper-aggressive creature that had been driven mad by the cataclysmic noise of the explosion. The beast flailed through the wreckage like a headless scavenger, desperate and disoriented. Ethan closed his eyes, reaching out to the planet's weakened magnetic field, its once reliable guide now twisted by the seismic shock and the disappearance of an entire landmass. He whispered, "It's lost its orientation. That's how we'll find it." Esdeath nodded. Together, they plunged into the chaos, ready to confront the super-dangerous predator before it could wreak further havoc on an already fragile world. Ethan paused at the edge of the wasteland, watching for any sign of movement. No one can say how many creatures that depend on Earth's magnetic field for navigation died when the magnetic fluctuations first hit. Those that survived now wander aimlessly, scattered across the landscape, impossible to track or predict. Experts warn that the turmoil in the magnetic field, coupled with the strange new gravitational tides, could last 1,000 years, rendering decades of technological advancement all but pointless. This global magnetic maelstrom is already magnetizing every metal surface, every plant, even the bodies of exposed animals. And yet, in the heart of this pandemonium, Ethan and his partner have done the unthinkable. They've tamed one of the storm's most dangerous offspring once more. Chapter 468, Esdeath's Ambition. Esdeath returned to the Empire immeasurably stronger, but instead of relief, she felt an even fiercer restlessness. That evening, she sought out her master in the Imperial Audience Hall. Bowing low, she dared to speak her heart. "Master, may I seize control of this nation in your name and install you as emperor?" Ethan regarded her coolly. He'd caught whispers of the legendary Supreme Imperial Arms hidden somewhere in the court, yet every minister he pressed refused to confirm its existence. Esdeath pressed on, her eyes alight. "It matters not whether the legends are true or false. With your power and my army, we can crush all opposition and claim the throne for you." Amusement flickered on Ethan's face. "Why should I be emperor?" he asked, arching a brow. Esdeath straightened, a adopting the steely poise of a battle-hardened commander. Why use my name as your puppet? If you truly desire the crown, claim it yourself. A low chuckle escaped Ethan. A mere throne held no interest for him. He had already seized the greatest treasure of the Crimson Eyes, a power that eclipsed any imperial title. His only devotions lay with two goddesses, Tifa, his first and unshakable admiration, and now Esdeath, his second. As for everyone else, Alice, Yuffie, and the band of girls who had attacked him by night, they were, in his eyes, unworthy distractions. The Empire might burn around them, but Ethan's loyalty would never waver. Ethan had always treated most of his favorite anime like pure entertainment. He never committed to a single waifu, the way some superfans switched obsessions every new season. Still, he believed that if you really fell for one, that love could last forever. As he imagined it, he couldn't help but wonder, could he ever sit on a real throne? Esdeath had never entertained such a thought. She was sharp enough to see the possibilities, but she lacked both the means and the support to seize power. In the world of Jean, Crimson Eyes, authority was born of blood, and those who wielded the supreme imperial gear held the reins. Even Minister Ernest, the Empire's steely-eyed power broker, didn't aspire to crown himself. He kept the young emperor close, for without royal blood, the gear lay inert. Ethan, on the other hand, would have played the game very differently. First, he'd take the throne by force. Then he'd ensure a royal heir every single year, enough princes and princesses to activate every imperial gear in the vaults. From the day they were born, he'd drill into their heads a single creed: live for the emperor, die for the emperor. Total loyalty, from cradle to grave. Such cold-blooded logic, he knew, was too ruthless for most in this realm, but it was the only way to bend destiny to his will. Ethan leaned back, a knowing smile playing at his lips. It's really no wonder they never considered it for themselves. After all, you're the one who built this empire, your actions, your ideas, your ambition. So why did you give the throne back to me? I never ordered it, yet here we are. Though I'm your sovereign, I entrusted you with full authority to make your own choices. Esdeath's eyes brightened at his words, but then she sighed softly. I can't be emperor, she admitted, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. Ethan's smile didn't fade. Why not? Being a general and being an emperor aren't so different. A good general makes a good ruler, and isn't the loyalty of the people the greatest proof of their love? He paused, recalling how in the original timeline, civilians had revered Esdeath and her soldiers simply because she defended them against foreign invaders. They cheered her name, placed their trust in her blade. If you still believe the Empire is cruel, he continued, why not ask the people along the border, those whose villages were invaded, whose families were slaughtered, what they think of cruelty? He let the question hang in the air, giving her a moment to see the truth he laid before her. Ethan's words lingered in Esdeath's mind long after their conversation ended. Emperor, general, are they really so different, she thought. If leading an empire was nothing more than commanding an army on a grander scale, then why shouldn't she, one of its strongest generals, aspire to the throne? A thrill of confidence ran through her. As long as I bring prosperity to the people, I will make an excellent emperor. Ethan watched her eyes light up. With a casual shrug, he said, Isn't that simple? Esdeath blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected the path to the throne to be so straightforward. By dawn the next morning, she was already on the move, determined to seize the throne for herself. Before the sun had fully risen, panic swept through the palace. From the main gate, Esdeath strode forward, her battalion still encamped in the northern provinces. With a sharp gesture, she drew on her innate power, crystallizing a phalanx of ice knights to flank her approach. Esdeath, what madness is this? Boomed a voice from the central courtyard. General Bood, sole holder of the title Great General and permanent guardian of the imperial seat, stepped forward, fury etched on his features. Though the court often spoke of Esdeath and Bood as the two pillars of the empire's defense, only a scion of the Bood family could ever be great general, and only a great general could dare stand between the aspiring usurper and the throne. Talent in this world is largely hereditary. Judging by the original storyline, General Bood isn't exceptionally strong. Esdeath, for example, could single-handedly wipe out all 10 Tegu users in one devastating assault. In fact, Someone like Ma Yin, alongside a handful of other Tegu wielders, could easily fill Buddha's role. Among the 4 greatest fighters in the original plot, General Bud might narrowly surpass the 100-man Slayer brand in raw strength. But if he squared off against Susanoo alone, he wouldn't stand a chance. When it comes to the dragon-transformed Tasmi and the twice-enhanced Will, Bud would be hard-pressed to gain the upper hand. Brand, the eldest brother, never saw his power evolve. Although he resonated on the same wavelength as the Haunting, his abilities remained frozen until his death. Tasmi, by contrast, evolved multiple times, each transformation boosting his might to near mythic levels. Will, having lost part of his internal organs to the Second Imperial Weapons enhancements, still retained enough strength to match the dragon-born Tasmi blow for blow. Tasmi's dragon form is so overwhelmingly powerful that even Esdeath refuses to engage him. There simply are no worthy opponents left in the Empire, certainly none who could challenge him once he reaches his full draconic potential. When Susanoo finally arrives on the scene, it will likely be a 50-50 fight at best. Ethan, the Empire's supreme commander, was one of the few people in whom Emperor Ernest placed absolute trust. Alongside the fearsome Esdeath, he was celebrated as one of the Empire's 2 mighty warriors. From his command post in the palace barracks, he led the Imperial Guard with stern discipline and unswerving loyalty. Old-fashioned and blunt by nature, Ethan believed a soldier's duty was to serve the throne without compromise. He treated ministers and nobles with the same curt restraint, earning himself the nickname Old Stubborn from the court, Esdeath included. Bound by a strict interpretation of ancestral edicts, he refused to meddle in politics, even as ministers grew rich on bribes and favoritism. Instead of overt confrontation, he quietly used his authority to protect the handful of honest officials who still served the Empire in good conscience. Without Ethan's watchful eye, many believe Emperor Ernest's rule would have collapsed beneath the weight of corruption long ago. "Old Stubborn," Esdeath called out one morning, her voice as cold as the ice that danced at her fingertips. She stood across the training grounds, her every movement boasting lethal grace. "I've been dying for a chance to spar with you." Ethan met her gaze without a flicker of doubt. "If it's a fight you want, see, Ninner, you won't have to wait any longer." At their side, General Bud watched with dark amusement. He, too, was a wielder of an imperial weapon, his armor a living conduit for lightning, nicknamed Admiler, the Thunder God's Wrath. Fitted directly to his frame, its elemental power crackled beneath his skin, promising a strike as swift as stormfire. The morning air crackled with tension. 2 of the Empire's greatest warriors, one bound by ice, the other by thunder, prepared to test their strength against Ethan's unbreakable will. In that moment, all who watched held their breath, for few battles in the Empire matched the fury and honor of this coming clash. Ethan's mastery over lightning is nothing short of legendary. He can channel raw electricity into crushing jolts, unleash bolts from afar, or condense his power into crackling energy spheres for long-range assault. When pressed in close combat, he summons a shimmering thunder armor that crackles with static, and anyone foolish enough to make contact is instantly paralyzed. His lethal versatility makes him a natural nemesis for melee-focused Imperial fighters like Leone and Tatsumi, both of whom he dispatched without mercy. Beyond these devastating personal strikes, Ethan commands 2 signature techniques: the area-devastating Thunder Emperor summoning, and the focused beam known as Solid Shooter. To top it all off, he manipulates electromagnetic fields to levitate at will, raining destruction down from the skies. Chapter 469, General Bud. General Bud knew Esdeath was powerful, but he was supremely confident. He'd never witnessed her true strength or the extent of her recent enhancements. Raising his voice, he summoned a roaring tempest. "Admalech!" Crackling arcs of lightning gathered around him in a blinding display. Esdeath watched coolly, a faint smile on her lips. "Such flair," she said softly. "Back then, this might have been impressive, but not anymore." With a graceful flick of her wrist, a pale blue glow swept over the thunderous bolts. In an instant, the crackling energy froze solid, every jagged bolt suspended midair, locked in crystalline stillness. Bud's eyes went wide. He'd never imagined Esdeath could halt even the raw power of lightning. He sneered, "Once your Tegu's power is gone, what can you do?" Hands on her hips, Esdeath tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. How arrogant of you, General. Without warning, Bude activated the twin drills built into his gauntlets. Their earth-shaking whir filled the air as he lunged forward, swinging a massive punch. Esdeath simply lifted her arm, her palm open, ready to catch his blow. Esdeath had fought her way to the rank of general through nothing but raw physical prowess, long before she ever wielded a tegu. As a girl, she'd slain every dangerous beast that threatened her tribe, proving again and again that her body was her deadliest weapon. A deafening roar shook the palace walls and then abruptly died away. Dust settled to reveal Esdeath and General Ethan locked in place. Their duel had reached an impasse. Neither combatant was willing or able to yield. Esdeath sheathed her sword and studied Ethan coolly. "You're more formidable than I expected." Ethan flexed the fingers of both hands, electric sparks dancing across his knuckles. He was a general in his own right, but he knew he still trailed her by a wide margin. He drew a steadying breath. "It doesn't matter. You must still fall." With that declaration, thunder and lightning coalesced around his arm, and he drove a crackling fist toward her chest. Esdeath leapt backward, escaping the full brunt of the blow by mere inches. In the blink that followed, her form blurred, then reappeared directly behind Ethan, her blade already raised. "What?" Ethan staggered, eyes widening in shock as Esdeath's cold grin promised the final strike. She sensed danger in an instant, spun on her heel, and unleashed a fierce blow. Krah! Her fist slammed into General Bude's, sending him hurtling backward. Sparks of lightning that crackled across his armor flickered and died. "Damn it!" Bude growled, spitting blood. He staggered to his feet, surprise and annoyance warring in his glare as he stared at Esdeath. He hadn't expected her speed to match, let alone exceed, his own. Without the power of her tegu, she was supposed to be at a disadvantage. Bude's eyes darkened. He tightened his grip on his thunderous warhammer and glared at her coldly. Esdeath's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. She refused to let her guard down. She knew he was far from beaten. In the next heartbeat, the lightning flared anew around Bude's body. With a crack of thunder, he vanished and reappeared behind her. "Suffer death!" he roared, swinging his warhammer in a devastating arc. Esdeath was caught off guard. The impact of the blow sent her tumbling through the air. She flipped twice, cutting through the wind, before landing hard on the frozen ground. Snow and ice sprayed everywhere as her knees buckled, but she forced herself to rise. Her eyes blazed as she faced General Bude across the snow-covered battlefield. The winter sky churned overhead, lightning bolts occasionally splitting the clouds, an omen of the fierce clash yet to come. Although Esdeath felt no physical wound, the sheer force of that blow still rattled her. Had it landed squarely, she could have been seriously hurt, or worse. General Bude studied her with cold amusement. "You're fast, you're powerful," he admitted, lightning crackling over his arms, "but your defense is far too weak." With that, he vanished and reappeared behind her. "You've got spirit," he taunted, "but you haven't even seen my true strength." Esdeath's eyes gleamed. In an instant, her aura shifted. Frost spread from her like a creeping fog, encasing the throne room in ice. Bude's lightning dimmed as he sensed her rising power. "What?" he faltered. Before he could finish, Esdeath struck. She blurred away from his side and materialized before him. "Die!" she roared, launching a crushing punch. Bude reacted at once, driving his own fist forward to meet hers. Boom! The impact sent a deafening shockwave rippling through the palace. Stone columns cracked and shattered, fragments flying as raw energy burst outward. Both warriors stood their ground amid the ruins, their auras clashing in a storm of ice and lightning, and the battle had only just begun. The entire palace shook as if it might collapse under the weight of the unleashed energy. In the heart of the upheaval, General Bud was sent crashing against the stone wall. Blood spurted from his mouth as he slumped to the floor, unconscious and motionless. Esdeath advanced with unhurried steps, her boots clicking against the marble. When she reached the fallen general, she looked down at him coolly and spoke in a crisp, even tone. "Your speed and strength are impressive, General, but your defense is far too weak." With a faint smile, she echoed his own words back to him. Bud's eyelids fluttered open, revealing a spark of malice in his eyes. He knew he stood no chance against Esdeath's power, yet he refused to yield. "Even if I die," he rasped, voice thick with defiance. "I will drag you down with me." A cruel grin curled his lips. Bracing himself, he drew a ragged breath. Then lightning crackled across his battered armor, and the air around him hummed with raw, destructive energy. Esdeath's gaze sharpened. He meant to trigger the Imperial weapon, detonating the palace and them together. Without a moment's hesitation, she leapt forward, her hand outstretched to strike him down before he could carry out his suicidal gambit. She released her power with unnerving calm. In an instant, a surge of energy erupted from her, coating the entire palace in a delicate shell of crystalline ice. A thunderous boom shook the hall. Pillars trembled and rubble skittered across the marble floors as the shockwave ripped outward, shattering everything in its path. Yet the explosion itself seemed to freeze mid-stride, each blast wave meeting the ice barrier and dissolving into harmless shards. The palace lay hushed beneath its frozen armor. The furious energy spent before it could do further harm. Chapter 470. The Supreme Emperor's gear activated. Esdeath hovered at the center of the vast ice chamber, her gaze unwavering. A powerful chill radiated from her, gradually quelling the shockwaves that still rattled the frozen walls. Encased within the crystal, her silhouette seemed to fuse with the ice itself, an unbreakable union of sorcery and stone. When the explosion finally subsided, the palace lay in ruins. Shards of ice drifted away like ghostly petals, revealing the devastation within. Where General Bud had once stood, there was nothing but scattered debris and fine ash. Yet Esdeath remained, tall and resolute, bathed in a shaft of pale blue light, as though she were an immortal goddess risen above the carnage. "I never took the old coot for such stubbornness," she whispered, her voice both amused and respectful. Bowing slightly to protect the palace's core, she brought her hands together. Instantly, a flawless ice crystal blossomed between her palms, its surface gleaming like a flawless gem. Slowly, deliberately, it began to absorb every remnant of the blast. Fractured beams, shattered statues, even the ash that was all that remained of General Bud. In moments, the crystal was swollen with power. Nothing lost, nothing overlooked. Esdeath lifted the orb before her, its brilliance reflecting in her icy eyes. With this, she would rebuild and unleash a force no one in the Empire would ever forget. Esdeath believed that any opponent worthy of her respect deserved a grand farewell. The ice crystal at her feet, an embodiment of her own power, would remain intact for millennia, even beneath the fiercest summer sun. Such was the unbreakable law of her frost. Her stiletto heels clicked sharply across the polished marble floor of the palace. "General Esdeath, please, we beg you, stop!" A line of palace guards surged forward, weapons drawn, but General Bud was nowhere in sight. Each man's eyes were haunted with grief. They'd rather die protecting his name than allow Esdeath to take another step. "Your loyalty is admirable," she observed coolly, "but empty threats hold no sway over me." She didn't need to raise a hand. A pale sheen of frost crept up the guards' bodies, freezing them in place almost instantly. They clawed and struggled, shattering brittle ice in their desperation, but within moments, each one stood encased in crystal, frozen mid-motion like tragic statues. Unfazed, Esdeath continued her advance. Behind the petrified front line, the remaining soldiers gaped in stunned silence, powerless to move as her chilling power drew ever closer. "Stop her!" someone shouted, and a squad of soldiers rushed forward to intercept Esdeath. From her vantage, they moved as slowly as snails. With barely an effort, she cut them down one by one until the ground was strewn with unconscious bodies. Nearby, Minister Ernest shepherded the young emperor to safety. The boy's eyes were wide with shock. "Minister, how could General Esdeath betray the Empire?" he whispered. Ernest swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your Majesty, she has gone mad. Esdeath seeks the throne for herself. General Bud tried to stop her, but he failed. Only you can halt her now." Inwardly, Ernest cursed his miscalculation. He had intended to let Esdeath and Bud weaken each other in a duel, then eliminate both rivals and seize power for himself. But Esdeath's strength had surpassed even his darkest expectations, and Bud didn't stand a chance against her ferocity. Now, only the young emperor remained who might save them all. The 4 Rakshasa ghosts sent to finish the job were so terrified that they fled back to headquarters, their voices shaking as they reported. Esdeath defeated General Bud without taking a single wound. Ernest's face went ashen. He clutched the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white. He still possessed that secret Imperial device, rumored to obliterate any other Imperial artifact, but he had no way of knowing whether it would even affect Esdeath's power source. If it worked, then the moment her device failed, the Rakshasa ghosts could swarm her and exact their revenge. If it didn't, they were all doomed. Ernest shook his head, unwilling to stake their lives on such a desperate gamble. "We can't afford to wait," he muttered. "Ethan must activate the Supreme Imperial equipment now." At that, Ethan, known among the court as the Little Emperor, looked up, his expression sharpening with resolve. He had nearly forgotten the true potential of the weapon he carried. The Supreme Imperial equipment was not only the first Imperial device ever forged, it was the pinnacle of all such creations. It stood at the very origin of the Empire's sacred armory, its power whispered in legends to rival that of the gods themselves. And, as only those bearing the Emperor's blood could summon its might, it was uniquely meant for Ethan alone. He drew a steady breath. Around him, the council chamber fell silent as he prepared to call upon the Empire's ultimate weapon and to decide, once and for all, whether their gamble would pay off or destroy them all. Ethan stood before the towering guardian god machine, often called the Supreme Imperial device, and felt a surge of both reverence and resolve. This Gundam-sized behemoth of steel and alchemy was the pinnacle of his empire's technology, its every joint and servo ringed with glowing runes. He knew that once he climbed into its cockpit, he would hold the fate of the realm in his hands. Inside the hangar, the gigantic form of the machine seemed to pulse with latent power. Rumor had it that its secret purge mode could reshape the armor into a draconic silhouette, unleash devastating weaponry, and even enhance the pilot's physical prowess. Though such power came at a terrible personal cost. Alchemical energies in the armor would gradually erode the user's mind, stoking an ever-growing bloodlust. Still, Ethan understood that without such force, the Empire would be defenseless against its enemies. He drew a steadying breath, then climbed into the cockpit. As soon as he settled into the seat, he reached for the activation lever. A cascade of blue energy flickered to life around him. "Royal blood verification, commencing," intoned the Guardian's crystallized voice. Along the instrument panel, delicate alchemical glyphs glowed. A tiny lance extended from the seat, drawing a bead of Ethan's blood from his fingertip. Within seconds, microscopic runes analyzed his lineage, confirming the purity of his royal bloodline. "Verification complete. Authorization granted," the machine intoned. Panels slid open around Ethan's armor mounts, and cables snapped into place at his shoulders and spine. The cockpit's canopy sealed with a hiss, and the runic circuits flared as Ethan's suit interfaced with the Guardian's core. He felt a rush of energy flood his body, power that was both exhilarating and unnerving. Outside, the hangar doors began to slide aside, revealing the morning sky. Around him, soldiers snapped to attention, their awe turning to jubilation as the massive doors finished opening. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He was Emperor, pilot, and protector all in one. He grasped the control sticks, voice calm but resolute. "Activate purge mode," he ordered. In response, torrents of alchemical fire burst along the Guardian's flank plates. The armor panels retracted, reassembling into sweeping, wing-like structures. A horned crest of dragon-scale metal rose on the machine's head. Ethan felt the armor's feral hunger awaken, a whisper at the edge of his mind, urging him toward carnage. He shook off the thought. Duty would prevail. Yet he could not deny the raw thrill coursing through his veins, the power to shield his empire, or to lay waste to all who dared threaten it. As the last panels clicked into place, the Guardian God Machine stood fully transformed, an armored dragon of living metal, its weapons systems primed and its defensive matrix at maximum. Ethan drew in a deep breath. "Let's go," he murmured. With that, he guided the Supreme Imperial device out of the hangar, every step echoing the promise that, so long as he lived, no foe would breach his empire's gates. Activation of a Supreme Tegu is a ritual of absolute precision. Any flaw and the colossal weapon will lie dormant. First, the pilot's bloodline must be verified. Once that is established, the initiation ceremony begins in earnest. The pilot steps into the very heart of the Supreme Tegu and links his life force to its core. As the ritual proceeded, the Supreme Imperial equipment exploded into brilliance. The suit's metal plates hummed and shifted, as though waking from a centuries-long slumber. Every joint and servo glowed with potential, awaiting only Ethan's command. But such power carries a terrible price. The moment the Tegu is fully activated, it guzzles the pilot's life energy with relentless hunger. A scorching surge of power roared through Ethan's veins. He felt his strength multiply tenfold, yet alongside that exhilaration came a crushing weight of responsibility. This was no mere tool of war. It was a living force demanding perfect unity with its master. He steeled himself, knowing he could not falter. Emerging from the throne room, Ethan guided the Supreme Imperial equipment into the palace courtyard. There, frozen in gleaming ice, stood General Esdeath, her guards, and scores of loyal soldiers, victims of some terrible assault. The sight struck him with ice-cold horror, yet it also ignited his resolve. This was precisely why he had accepted the burden of the Tegu. Ethan pressed a button on the suit's control panel. A resonant voice boomed from its speakers, carrying his command across the silent courtyard. General Esdeath, why did you do this? Chapter 471, Gundam War. Esdeath's voice was ice-cold. So you claim to be doing this for the Empire's future. Do you truly believe you can become Emperor? The ministers will never accept you. Ethan lifted his chin. I don't need the minister's approval. I only need the Empire's. Esdeath studied him, her eyes narrowing. You really think you have the strength for such a burden? His reply was calm and steady. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. A faint smile curved her lips. Very well, then let's see what you can do. Ethan stepped onto the launch platform and strode toward the towering frame of the Supreme Emperor. Inside the cockpit, he felt his pulse quicken and his breath come faster. For the sake of the Empire, and for all those who trusted him, he had to master this power. With a resonant thrum, the Supreme Emperor began its startup sequence. Hydraulic servos hissed, reactors ignited, and every subsystem whirred to life. The cockpit glowed with data streams, and a surge of raw energy coursed through its armored shell. Ethan could feel the machine's vitality pressing in on him like a living pulse. He took a steadying breath and closed his eyes. Focusing all his will, he reached out mentally and forged a connection with the Gundam's central neural link. A spark of understanding flared between pilot and machine, an unspoken bond that would decide the fate of the coming war. Ethan felt his mind fuse with the Supreme Emperor's AI, granting him complete command over every motion and every strike. No longer the timid boy he once was, he now stood as a true warrior. With a roar of determination, he drove the massive war machine forward, its armored feet pounding the battlefield as he bore down on Esdeath. He knew that if he failed to defeat her, the Empire would unravel into chaos. Towering above the field, the Supreme Emperor's primary weapon, a gigantic energy cannon, was mounted in its crown. The blood-red gem at its center pulsed like the eye of some slumbering beast, radiating raw power. Ethan drew a deep breath, channeling his will through the mech's neural interface. Energy crackled along the barrel as the gem flared to life. He fixed his sights on Esdeath. Fire. With a deafening boom, a searing scarlet beam erupted from the cannon, slicing through the air like a fiery dragon. The heat alone distorted the atmosphere, waves of suffocating warmth rippling outward. Esdeath watched with mild interest, her icy composure unshaken by the torrent of energy hurtling toward her. Boom! The blast detonated on impact, unleashing a towering mushroom cloud and a rolling fireball that scorched the earth. Ash and debris danced in the crimson glow as the crater widened, leaving a smoldering scar on the battlefield. Ethan gripped the controls, heart pounding. He scanned the haze for any sign of Esdeath, ready for whatever came next. Esdeath's heart clenched as she watched the Supreme Emperor's energy cannon charge. If that beam struck the Imperial capital unchecked, the entire city would be reduced to ashes, and its citizens along with it. There was no time left for stealth. Stepping forward, she summoned her willpower and conjured a colossal shield of ice, its surface glittering under the torchlight. The moment the crimson beam met the barrier, a thunderous crack echoed through the throne room. Heat seared the shield's outer layer, melting ice into steam, but the core remained unshaken. The biting cold within the ice slowed the beam's molecules, preventing a catastrophic explosion. Across the hall, Ethan, the boy once so timid, now stood transformed. His shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering, he embodied nothing less than the Empire's defiant spirit. With a surge of determination, he gripped the cannon's control rod and thrust it toward Esdeath, unleashing an even more powerful burst of red energy. For a heartbeat, the two beams collided in midair, weaving a river of crimson light that bathed the entire palace in an ominous glow. Neither power yielded, not yet, while fate hung in the balance. Each explosion thundered through the grand palace, its shockwaves rattling columns and sending marble fragments skittering across the floor. A choking cloud of dust and smoke curled through the corridors, obscuring friend and foe alike. From the haze, Ethan's defiant voice rang out, "I won't let you destroy our future." He lunged forward, every step fueled by determination. "For our future, you must vanish." With that, the Supreme Emperor within him roared to life, unleashing a torrent of energy so fierce it rent the very air. Ethan knew his ordinary attacks would never fell Esdeath now. He shoved aside every hesitation and activated the Supreme Emperor's Purge Mode, an ultimate form that would vastly amplify his power, but at a dire cost to his own vitality. A brilliant corona of light erupted from his crown, splitting into two colossal crimson cannons that hovered menacingly at his temples. The rune etched in his palm flared scarlet, drawing raw energy into a coiling beam of destructive potential. As the purge energy surged through his veins, Ethan's features twisted. A jagged fissure cracked across his mouth, revealing a nightmarish maw bristling with additional energy barrels. Now fully transformed, Ethan stood ready to unleash his most devastating assault. No matter the price, he would break Esdeath here and secure the Empire's future. 10 crimson energy cannons slid into place along each of the Supreme Imperial Gear's broad shoulders, their barrels humming with barely contained power. Esdeath watched without a hint of surprise. With a graceful motion, she pressed her fingertips to the cobblestones. A circle of sapphire light bloomed beneath her, expanding outward until it swallowed half of the imperial capital. From its center rose a towering frost knight, easily 300 meters tall, clad in crystalline ice armor and gripping a sword carved from solid frost. Atop its helm, an icy throne took shape, and Esdeath settled onto it with regal poise. "Come forth, your majesty," she called, crossing one leg over the other. A cruel smile tugged at her lips. "This is our final battle." Across the field, the young Emperor Ethan activated Purge Mode. Scarlet light pulsed across the gear's frame as if it were ablaze. "For the Empire," he roared and hurled himself forward. When the two titans met, the impact shattered the air. The gear's 10 shoulder cannons on each side unleashed searing red beams in a sweeping volley, striking the Frost Knight's icy armor from every angle in a breathtaking display of fire against ice. Ethan's armor unleashed searing beams of destructive light, each blast powerful enough to utterly shatter the Frost Knight. At least that's what it felt like. But the Frost Knight proved its mettle. The energy bolts only scored shallow scratches on its icy plates, never reaching its core. With a thunderous roar, the knight swung its colossal broadsword in return. Each arc crackled with deadly cold, as though it could slice the Supreme Emperor's armor in two. Yet the Emperor's suit did not falter. Its hydraulic joints and servo-driven limbs moved with surprising agility. It could not dodge the Frost Knight's blows, but it absorbed them, metal groaning under the onslaught. Rumors said this armor had once faced legendary terrors, cloud-bound dragons of the Eastern Sea or the ice behemoths of the far north, and survived. Here in the heart of the imperial capital, those old stories mattered little against the monster before Ethan now. Their weapons collided again, the impact echoing like distant thunder through the palace square. Ethan gritted his teeth as each shockwave rattled the cockpit. Heat flared in the control console. Power surges lit warning beacons along the armor's frame. The young Emperor could feel every system groan under the strain. If the Frost Knight pressed this hard for much longer, even the Supreme Emperor's armor might crack. Chapter 472, Slaughter of a Million General. Esdeath's lips curved into a frosty sneer. "Humph, the so-called Supreme Emperor is nothing but a joke." Her eyes blazed with contempt. To Esdeath, the Supreme Emperor wasn't even worth the effort of a proper challenge. Standing nearby, Minister Ernest felt his heart pound in disbelief. He'd never imagined that Esdeath, this woman he had long underestimated, could actually go toe-to-toe with the fabled, invincible ruler. And yet, here was proof. The Supreme Emperor looked humiliated, his once unyielding presence reduced to impotence before her. Ernest's thoughts raced. Why had he poured so many resources into controlling the Supreme Emperor by manipulating the child on the throne? If Esdeath had revealed this overwhelming power from the start, he would have crowned her queen and pledged his loyalty on the spot. Regret washed over him as he murmured under his breath, "It's over. Esdeath's strength outshines his by leagues. We should retreat before it's too late." From his vantage point, Ernest could see it clearly. The frost giant summoned by the Supreme Emperor was utterly outmatched by Esdeath's relentless ice magic. The massive frost giant's greatest strength was its near-impervious hide and elastic flesh. No matter how fiercely Ethan, known across the realm as the Supreme Emperor, struck it, the giant's wounds closed almost instantly, and fueled by the endless cold Esdeath poured into its veins. Each gash and crack vanished in the blink of an eye as frost seeped into muscle and bone, knitting them back together. But Ethan's own reserves were draining fast. In purge mode, his power surged beyond all usual limits, but it could not last forever. He felt the tide turning against him as the frost giant pressed its advantage, hammering him with colossal fists of ice. Every blow stole a little more of his strength. If he didn't end this battle soon, his energy would collapse entirely, and he'd be left defenseless. Time ran out like sand through an hourglass, and desperation coiled in Ethan's chest. Summoning the last threads of his power, he locked eyes on the towering monster before him and unleashed his ultimate technique, the cluster ray. In an instant, all the raw energy coursing through his body converged into a single, blinding beam. It cut through the frozen air like a razor's edge, brilliant as lightning tearing across a stormy sky. Nothing could stand against it. Tatsumi had discovered the Supreme Emperor's one true weakness, his exposed abdomen. That's why no one among the lesser lords ever dared to unleash the Emperor's ultimate beam. Once fired, no outcome could be guaranteed. Ethan inhaled deeply and poured every ounce of his power into replicating that forbidden attack. As his strength coalesced, the Supreme Emperor let out a roar, its gaping maw glowing with raw energy. At first a pinpoint of blinding light, it swelled into a brilliant beam that cleaved the sky like a celestial sword. Its hue shifted slowly from burning crimson to a cold, menacing violet, and from its core emanated a breath so frigid it set the air trembling. Under the beam's glare, the battlefield fell eerily silent, as if day had suddenly surrendered to night. Every warrior held their breath, eyes locked on the streak of light, hearts pounding with its oppressive power. Wherever the beam swept, the very air ignited. Waves of stifling heat rippled outward, warping the atmosphere and turning the world into a furnace. In that moment, it seemed as though nothing could stand against Ethan's desperate gambit. Ethan, the young emperor, clenched his fists and poured every ounce of his remaining energy into his attack. This was his last hope. The massive frost giant reeled under the blow, its crystalline form beginning to fracture and crack, as though an iceberg were melting beneath an unrelenting sun. Esdeath's eyes narrowed in surprise. She hadn't expected the boy to muster such power. "Pathetic," she murmured, "still far too weak." With a guttural roar, the frost giant threw back its head and drew in a lungful of frigid air. Its entire body glowed with an eerie sapphire light as the cold coalesced in its throat. "Absolute freezing air," it thundered. A torrent of deep blue frost blasted from its mouth. Wherever the beam swept, the ground froze solid, and nearby flames were snuffed out in an instant. The force of the blast was like a volcanic eruption, an earth-shaking shockwave that rippled across the city. In midair, Ethan's desperate strike collided with the frost giant's blizzard-like attack. The impact detonated in a deafening boom that sent shockwaves through the battlefield, as though the world itself were splitting apart. Ethan channeled every ounce of power into the blast as fire and ice collided above the battlefield. Rings of frozen air met rolling waves of flame, and each impact unleashed shockwaves that rippled across the plain like a tidal surge. Under the onslaught, the Emperor's device, an immense war machine fused with the corpse of a dragon superspecies, shuddered violently. Its armored plates split open, peeling back to reveal living muscle and sinew beneath. From that hidden core, Ethan unleashed the dragon's energy cannon in a blinding beam of pure force. The beam struck the frost giant square in the chest, gouging out dozens of smoking holes. Brilliant frostlight flickered and then waned, as though the giant itself were being erased. With a final echoing roar, the creature collapsed, its massive form dissolved into drifting shards of ice that the cold wind carried away. Silence fell. The cannon's muzzle clanked shut, and the device's systems powered down one by one. Ethan's shoulders slumped. He pressed his palms against the console, breath ragged. He had given everything to this fight, every ounce of strength and courage, but the gulf between him and his opponent had proven too great. Defeat settled over him like a shroud. Above the rubble, Esdeath descended gracefully. She landed in the drifting snow and surveyed the wreckage with cool detachment. Around them, the last fragments of the frost giant vanished, leaving only the stillness of a battle concluded. From this day forward, I am the Empire's new emperor. Esdeath didn't bother with a formal declaration of the little emperor's death. Such announcements were beneath her. What mattered was quelling the public's fury by choosing a suitable scapegoat. Ethan had taught her the importance of killing the chicken to scare the monkey, and Minister Ernest and his son Shelia were perfect targets. Once Esdeath secured her victory, she made no detour to the captive former emperor in the Supreme Chamber. Instead, she summoned the palace troops and ordered them to arrest Ernest and Shelia at once. The only forces available were the Imperial Guards, those who manned the palace gates, and the elite Capital Guard, led by the notorious Selu. The capital had no separate army. These guards were the Empire's sole defenders. Now that Esdeath had crushed the old regime with overwhelming force and claimed the throne herself, her rule was unchallengeable. No one dared defy her orders. Minister Ernest's escape went off without a hitch. After all, he'd once been a disciple of the Royal Fist Temple alongside the legendary 4 Rakshasa Phantoms, even if he later grew complacent and abandoned his training. At that very moment, the exiled Sheila returned to the Empire, accompanied by a force of mighty warriors he had recruited from every corner of the world. But when they reached the capital, they were met with scenes of unimaginable devastation. By the time Sheila broke through the chaos to find his father, the Supreme Emperor lay defeated. With no time to spare, Ernest seized his son Ethan and lunged for the nearest exit, shouting, "We must run now!" Chapter 473. The Second Humanoid, Super Dangerous Species. Sheila had spent years wandering the world, absorbing martial arts techniques wherever she traveled. She mastered the elegant yet devastating windmill kick, and once single-handedly defeated dozens of disciples from the Imperial Fist Temple. General Bood himself praised her as a young but fully accomplished kung fu master. On her journey, Sheila also gathered notorious criminals and formidable fighters under her banner, and hunted down scattered Tegu beyond the Empire's borders. Her prized Tegu, Dimensional Phalanx, and Shangri-La both grant exceptional space warping abilities. By inscribing a target's location onto the device, she can instantly transport that person to any previously marked point. Among all Tegu, theirs rank among the very best. It was thanks to this power that Minister Ernest made his narrow escape. Once the alarms of the Imperial Equipment Storehouse sounded, he and Sheila vanished in a flash of light, leaving behind every piece of war gear they might have claimed. Now, the authorities had no clue where to look for them, nor how to anticipate their next move. Word of their flight reached Esdeath's ears almost at once. Those who had suffered at Ernest's hands were eager for revenge, and many bore grudges against Sheila as well. Filled with righteous fury, they would pursue the fugitives relentlessly, once Esdeath issued her orders. Yet even she lacked a precise trail to follow. All she had was the rumor of a sudden spatial rupture and whispers of a Tegu capable of rewriting space itself. Whoever controlled such power was to be marked super dangerous, a threat above and beyond any ordinary criminal. Now, within the cold marble halls of the palace, Ethan, formerly known as Luther, stood before Esdeath, awaiting her verdict. He, too, had witnessed the minister's disappearance and understood the gravity of the situation. Esdeath's pale eyes gleamed as she tapped her slender fingers against the armrest of her throne. "We have two choices," she said. "We can marshal every available regiment to scour the Empire for signs of dimensional phalanx, Or we can send a small, elite team, one that moves as swiftly and silently as the wind. Ethan nodded. He knew well the kind of danger posed by a Tegu that could bend space. A frontal assault risked walking straight into an ambush. The elite squad, he replied. They should strike before Ernest and Sheila know a man is on their trail. Esdeath's lips curved into a cold smile. Very good. Prepare your best hunters. I will personally oversee the operation. As she rose, her uniform slicing through the torchlight like a shard of ice, Ethan clenched his fists. This hunt would be unlike any other, against enemies who could vanish the moment you found them. But he had no intention of letting them slip away again. Even the imperfect official weapons, forged by later emperors in Tegu's wake, had never been recovered. At most, 4 Rakshasa phantoms roamed free, along with the handful of masters caught in Sheila's snare, formidable perhaps, but nothing compared to the Empire's might. Esdeath's cold gaze swept the council chamber. What? Still no trace of it? Her personal guard shifted uneasily. Captain Jagger cleared his throat. Your Majesty, please consider that Minister Ernest perished during your clash with the rebel emperor. There simply was no one to recover him. Esdeath's eyes narrowed. Ernest's robust constitution made his sudden loss conceivable, but also troubling. She drew a slow breath. No, they haven't died. They've escaped. From the shadows stepped a young man, his dark hair catching the torchlight. They slipped away, he confirmed. A sudden hush fell over the room. My lord, how do you know? Stammered Captain Ricardo. Esdeath raised an eyebrow, and the court exchanged startled glances. One guard whispered to another, She calls him my lord? He's just a boy. No, a young man. Yet he speaks with more authority than Her Majesty herself. Could he truly be more terrifying than the Empress of Ice? Ethan's smile never wavered. Don't doubt me. Ernest's son Sheila wields an imperial arms called Dimensional Phalanx, Shangri-La. It lets him and anyone he chooses vanish from one place and reappear in another. No wonder you haven't tracked them down. But I can sense exactly where they are, albeit only roughly each time. So here's my proposal. Let's turn this into a game, a battle royale of revenge. We recruit every soul who's been wronged by Ernest or his son, drop them into Sheila's vicinity, and let them settle the score. He leaned back, assured. I'll supply only general coordinates. Whether they make the kill will be down to their own skill. But I promise you, they won't be allowed to escape. Esdeath's eyes glittered at the idea. A battle royale, far more entertaining than simple torture. An Avengers tournament, she murmured, but we can't send in weak fighters. She turned the plan over in her mind. Ethan had just named all the Imperial arms users around Ernest, the 4 Rakshasa ghosts capable of hunting down Tegu wielders, plus every other Imperial arms bearer in his service. Ordinary soldiers would stand no chance. They'd need true Tegu masters, deadly, determined, and desperate enough to finish what they start. Ethan leaned back in his chair, contemplating the rumors that swirled around Tegu users. Despite their fearsome reputations, stories claimed that any skilled warrior could slay one, and that some even believed they could match a Tegu's power. Yet in Esdeath's command there were still no fabled 3 beast warriors, elite lieutenants said to rival the greatest Tegu wielders. General Leva had once been the Empire's golden boy, until he'd been framed for refusing a bribe and thrown into prison. Esdeath personally uncovered the conspiracy, broke him out, and ever since he'd served her with undying loyalty. Brand, by contrast, remained faithfully at Esdeath's side. His own betrayal of the Empire would come only later, after Leva's arrest. When Ethan pointed out that timeline to Esdeath, it piqued her interest, and she immediately summoned both officers. The Imperial capital had taken a beating. 1/3 of the city lay in ruins after Esdeath's duel with the Supreme Imperial Instrument, but reconstruction was already well underway, and the government continued to function. It took barely a day to round up General Leva and General Brand. In the vast council chamber, Esdeath stood motionless in her standard uniform. She refused to wear the Emperor's cumbersome crown, too hot, too stiff, and a clumsy fit with her fighting style. Her pale blue eyes swept over the 2 men, her voice cold and precise. Leva, Brand, she announced, you both possess the talent to wield a Tegu. Brand and Leva froze, exchanging bewildered looks. Neither had any idea where Esdeath was going with this. Was she really offering them the power of a Tegu? The Empire's most notorious criminal, Ernest, and his son have just escaped. In response, the Empress has decreed the creation of a ruthless new task force, no questions asked, kill on sight, to track them down. Henceforth, they will be called the Avengers. Esdeath sat on her throne, watching her two newest appointees with calm, unreadable eyes. "I understand," she said at last. Before her stood Leva and Brand, soldiers of proven skill but limited opportunity, who had been uneasy about this summons. No one expected the Empress to reach so far beyond her regular circle. Now, with Ernest's infamy so well known across the Empire, the reason became clear. Both men straightened, resolve hardening in their expressions. "Your Majesty," Leva declared, bowing deeply. "You have my word. I will bring Ernest back, dead or alive." Brand stepped forward, voice ringing with fervor. "If we can't capture him, his body will suffice." Esdeath nodded in approval. "Excellent. For this mission, I grant you each a tegu." Leva reached for the ornate briefcase at the foot of the throne. Inside lay his new weapon. Brand took his in both hands, the tegu known as Haunted by Demons, and felt its power humming beneath his fingertips. To test his prowess, Esdeath herself stood and invited Brand to spar. Steel met steel in a burst of blue light, and the hall echoed with the promise of what was to come. Thus were forged the Avengers, an elite unit destined to become the Empire's deadliest blade and Ernest's greatest threat. As Deeth leaned forward, her pale eyes glittering with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You really believe Brand ranks just below me in strength?" she asked, her tone cool but interested. Ethan met her gaze evenly. "Yes, and it's all thanks to the Imperial tool, Devil's Haunting. Its potential is virtually limitless. Every time someone, Ernest or any of the others, breaks through Brand's armor, that armor grows tougher and Brand himself grows stronger. It's an adaptive reinforcement. Repeated damage leads to rapid evolution." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My goal is to drive Brand into what I call super evolution, so he can withstand any Imperial weapon, even Murasame's one-hit kill toxin. As you know, Tyrande can adapt to that sort of poison. It's only a question of exposure. The original super dangerous species never had cursed toxins. They simply possessed the deadliest natural poisons on Earth. It was alchemy that turned them into curses. To ensure Brand doesn't succumb as he adapts, I've arranged daily poison gas drills while he's wearing Devil's Haunting. Bit by bit, he'll build the tolerance he needs to survive, and ultimately master every threat our Empire can throw at him. Though Tyrande's cells will rapidly corrode Brand's flesh and blood, leaving his body riddled with holes, once he begins his dragon transformation, he'll possess the strongest human frame on the planet. Much like Esdeath, both beings are exceptionally dangerous species, capable of taking humanoid form. Their only real difference? One wields a psychological menace, while the other is a force of pure physical destruction. Ethan sat back and considered his options. In the world of Crimson Eyes, he realized cultivating dangerous humanoid species held far more promise than even the most advanced Tegu research, as long as you could retain control. Without that self-mastery, any attempt to harness such ferocity, whether through mental conditioning or physical augmentation, would only end in ruin. That was precisely why Tyrande cells fascinated him. They were, in effect, the universe's answer to Hashirama cells, biological materials so potent that if you could withstand the cellular erosion they inevitably caused, you'd ascend to shadow-level strength. Even after being forged into a Tegu, Tyrande's cells and living flesh remained active within the weapon's alloyed armor. The result was an ironclad shell laced with muscle, nerves, and regenerative tissue, granting near immortality at the cellular level and the ability to resurrect from fatal wounds. Yet the true terror of Tyrande cells lay in their adaptability. In the original legend, Tasmi endured the ultra-low temperatures of Mahabhatmo, the Tegu that could freeze time without freezing himself. When time resumed, he moved freely, untouched by the absolute cold around him. If Tyrande's adaptive qualities could be combined with even a fraction of that resilience, the bearer would wield the most formidable body on Earth. Ethan leaned forward, the pieces clicking together in his mind. In theory, a human infused and tempered with Tyrande cells could become literally unstoppable, and that potential was too great to ignore. Chapter 7. The Many Faces of Tyrande. Ethan leaned over the datapad, His brow furrowed as the archive's holographic display flickered to life. It wasn't just a single Tyrande. The legend spoke of an entire lineage, each variant honed by its own harsh environment and elemental force. What he was about to learn would reshape everything he thought he knew about these living war machines. First came Volcano Tyrande. Forged in the heart of a raging caldera, she could spew rivers of molten lava and unleash infernos that rivaled the sun's furnace. Her very footsteps cracked the earth, and those who dared face her were quickly overwhelmed by scorching heat and searing rock. Above the highest cloud banks soared Sky Tyrande. Wrapped in storm clouds and crackling with electric fury, she summoned tornadoes, hurricanes, and thunderbolts at will. Pilots who tried to intercept her aircraft found themselves trapped in cyclonic winds. No weapon could pierce that swirling veil of lightning. Then there was the Shade Tyrande, hunted relentlessly by the First Emperor's legions. Over time, she evolved near-perfect invisibility, her flesh bending light so completely that even the most advanced sensors failed to detect her presence. The moment she was bound into a tegu, that stealth became an intrinsic part of her power, a living shadow capable of striking without warning. Ethan paused the playback, absorbing the scope of it all. Could a Tyrande exist that even these records hadn't captured? Rumor whispered of a primordial prototype, older than any empire, whose power had eclipsed all others. If such a beast still roamed the world, it would be the ultimate apex of destruction. The archive then shifted to an unexpected comparison. Donghai Yunzhonglong, the East China Sea cloud dragon, whose silvery mane could deflect spatial slashes, attacks so pure that in theory, no matter or energy should withstand them. Yet those hairs formed an adaptive barrier, neutralizing cuts through space itself. If any creature could match, or even outgrow that defense, it would be a Tyrande given time to evolve. Ethan tapped the final entry. Perhaps there are cosmic Tyrande, titans whose scale dwarfs continents. In truth, Tyrande stand in our world as living cataclysms, beings as unstoppable as Doomsday and as colossal as Godzilla. He stared at the empty chamber surrounding him, heart-pounding. In John Crimson Eyes' vast and brutal landscape, these were the gods of war, and humanity's survival might hinge on understanding how many Tyrande remained and where. Ethan watched Bran's transformation with a mixture of awe and dread. No one knows the true upper limit of evolution, but one thing was certain. Brand was destined to become the world's strongest creature, reigning over sea, land, and air. His body was now pocked with gashes from repeatedly overdraining his life force and inviting evil spirits to fuse with him. Yet even wounded, his power had already surpassed his original peak. No ordinary blow could fell him now. Worse still, Ethan saw the corrosive Tyrande cells seeping into Bran's flesh, twisting him into a dragon reminiscent of Tasmi from the old legends. A fierce, unbridled life force pulsed through Bran's veins, promising an eventual metamorphosis into an unstoppable titan. Recognizing the value of these mutant cells, Ethan carefully extracted samples from Brand and began testing them on death row inmates, remorseless war criminals from the fallen empire whose executions would stir little public sympathy. As the experiments continued, Esdeath, despite her relentless duties, stole away each day to visit her master, seeking in his presence the only solace that could fill the emptiness in her heart. Ethan peered into the containment chamber where the latest creature lay collapsed on the floor. Its body was mottled with dragon-like scales, half human, half beast, and now it was motionless. Esdeath stepped forward, concern etched on her face. "My lord, what exactly are you doing?" she asked. Ethan tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I've been trying to engineer a squad of powerful subordinates for your army. I used Tyrande's cells to grant them extraordinary regenerative abilities, but they proved too volatile. Even after neutralizing their excess strength with Brand's cells, they still couldn't withstand the biological corruption inherent to Tyrande's bloodline. They've been dead for millennia. If only I'd had access to pure Tyrande DNA from the original source." Esdeath frowned. "So they perish because their bodies can't contain that power?" Ethan shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. "In less time than it takes most people to draw breath, too. But don't worry. This is merely a preliminary test. With my enhanced intellect, I'm confident I can solve the stability issue." "And to build stronger bodies," Esdeath prompted. Ethan's eyes gleamed. Exactly. Which brings me to my next idea, the northern tribes. Esdeath tilted her head. The so-called aliens of the frozen north? Ethan nodded. He recalled how those fierce northern warriors, hundreds of thousands strong, had once marched on this realm before Esdeath herself decimated their forces. They invaded again, yes? Esdeath's lips curled into a small knowing smile. They did, and I simply haven't had the time to finish them off. Ethan's grin widened. Excellent. Their hardy physiology might be the perfect foundation for my new experiments. Imagine half-northern, half-dragon super soldiers, unyielding in both body and mind. Esdeath's eyes sparkled with approval. Proceed then. Bring me soldiers worthy of legend. With that, Ethan turned away to prepare his next test, already plotting how to conquer nature itself and bend it to their will. Ethan sat quietly as Esdeath outlined her plan, her eyes alight with cold calculation. Yes, she said, a cruel smile curving her lips. This time we'll annihilate their entire army and leave only the children behind. Those orphans will grow up consumed by hatred for the Empire. Born in misery and dying in blissful peace, they'll carry nothing but despair. Their nation will crumble from within, and our forces will stand unchallenged. Ethan inclined his head, impressed despite himself. Your strategy is ruthless, but disturbingly brilliant. The Empire has long lacked a worthy foe. The Western Alchemy Kingdom is too weak to threaten us, and the distant realms hold no strategic value. We've dismissed those borderlands as irrelevant, until now. Exactly, Esdeath agreed, her voice low and confident. By using the northern tribes as our whetstone, we'll sharpen the Empire's blade to perfection. Ethan leaned forward. There's one more consideration. You don't need to exterminate everyone. As we rebuild the Empire, we'll need laborers for the mines, the fields, the workshops. We can enslave the survivors, forcing them to serve until they die. Every life we capture becomes a resource for our rebirth. Esdeath regarded him thoughtfully, the faintest flicker of approval in her gaze. She was listening and already planning the next step. Queen Esdeath had always prided herself on her strength, yet she knew there were gaps in her knowledge, skills she had yet to master. That was why she was drawn to Ethan. Rumor whispered that he'd tutored empresses and even goddesses, but Esdeath felt certain she was different. More than a scholar, Ethan was a gifted teacher, patient and ingenious in his methods. On the second day of their lessons, Ethan led the queen into the misty foothills just beyond the palace walls. There, he showed her how to scale sheer crags in search of the mountain's hidden treasures. Pearls dark as storm clouds, jade veins threaded through ancient rock, and crystalline quartz that caught the dawnlight like captured rays of the sun. Balance your weight here, he coached gently, pointing to a narrow ledge barely a foot wide, and reach for that handhold. Step by step, he guided her, demonstrating each movement until Esdeath found her own rhythm. With Ethan's steady encouragement, she gathered the precious stones herself, the thrill of discovery lighting her fierce blue eyes. When at last she stood victorious on the peak, clutching her spoils, Esdeath felt a spark of revelation. Lessons in climbing had led her to something greater, a new strategy for the Empire. The court was roiled by a struggle for orthodoxy, noble houses contesting the right to rule in her name. Though crowned queen, Esdeath's authority was still questioned, her legitimacy clipped by whispers of dissent. As they descended the slope, she turned to Ethan, resolve shining in her gaze. I will lead our legions in person, she declared. A decisive victory, won under my banner, will unite the realm. My civil virtues and my prowess in battle must be shown together. Only then can I silence the critics. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Power taken by force alone breeds tyranny. To win hearts and minds, you must allow your opponents dignity in defeat. Show mercy when you can, and strength when you must. Esdeath's lips curved in a rare, approving smile. Standing there, the wind tugging at her cloak, she felt an unshakable confidence. Under her rule, and guided by Ethan's wisdom, the Empire would finally know unity, and she would be its rightful, unchallenged sovereign. Ethan stepped onto the dais and raised his hand for silence. From this day forward, he announced, our realm shall no longer go by its old name. We shall be known as the Imperial Kingdom, and our sovereign as Empress Esdeath. A hush fell over the assembly as Esdeath herself, tall, pale, and built like a warrior born rather than made, rose to accept her title. With her supernatural longevity, She could easily outlast centuries of mortal rulers. Yet today she faced her first true test, consolidating her rule by force of arms and by forging loyalty among her people. Though Esdeath possessed the strength to crush any foe single-handedly, Ethan leaned close and spoke low enough only she could hear. Power alone won't secure our reign. We must display not just your personal might, but the full might of our army. That show of strength will deter rebellions and make even the most stubborn dissenters think twice before rising up. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This is how we subdue the enemy without fighting. And when battle is truly unavoidable, we shall combine kindness with force, mercy for those who yield, iron for those who don't. Esdeath's sapphire eyes narrowed in contemplation. She had never cared for politics or strategy. Her life had always been spent on the battlefield, not in council chambers. Still, she bowed once, crisply, to Ethan's plan. In that moment, she pledged herself to both his vision and his authority. Whether through the soft touch of diplomacy or the hard edge of her blade, the new empress would see the imperial kingdom rise unchallenged. Chapter 475. The Biological Imperial Weapon. Ethan halted beside a partially cleared training ground and turned to Esdeath. By the way, while our experiment converting death row inmates into enhanced humanoids largely failed, we did achieve some remarkable successes. Esdeath crossed her arms, curiosity flickering in her icy blue eyes. Oh, do tell. A few more steps brought them into full view of three massive figures. Each stood at least 2 meters tall, their skin a mosaic of iridescent scales, muscle rippling beneath. Unmistakably draconic, they each sprouted 3 snarling heads, each maw lined with dagger-like teeth. Even from a distance, their raw vitality felt almost tangible. These are our latest creations, Ethan explained quietly. Biological tegu forged from a hybrid cell line, part Tyrande, part Brand. Their combat effectiveness is off the charts. Esdeath studied the creatures. Where are their tegu users? Ethan shook his head. There aren't any. They operate entirely on their own. He paused, letting the scale-clad hybrids flex their wings. By refining the core matrix, I've made each specimen self-sustaining. As long as the central organ remains intact, they can regenerate and resurrect indefinitely. Esdeath's lips curved into a slow, approving smile. Autonomous weapons that never die. Ingenious. Ethan met her gaze. Precisely. With these biological tegu, the Empire's front lines will never collapse. And if they prove too resilient, we still have more enhancements in reserve. Esdeath turned back to the dragon men, her excitement barely contained. In the flickering torchlight, their 3 heads roared in unison, a promise of devastation to come. Ethan studied the floating schematics of tegu technology with intense focus. Despite its fearsome reputation, there was nothing inherently mystical or otherworldly about it, just finely tuned engineering. With the right expertise, he could reverse engineer and mass-produce any tegu device. Improving on them required no supernatural gift, only a genius-level mind. He tapped one of the holographic icons, and a hulking construct shimmered into view. Steel Dragon. Towering nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, the Steel Dragon's body was sheathed in an interlocking exoskeleton of iron-like plates. Each plate caught the light with a metallic sheen, yet overlapped so precisely it formed an almost impenetrable armor. Jagged spikes and barbs ran down its spine, lending it a savage, predatory look. Its massive claws, each as sharp as any assassin's blade, gleamed with a cold, steely light. 2 orb-like eyes, polished to a mirror finish, stared back with unbreakable resolve. Every muscle along its flanks and haunches appeared sculpted, ready to unleash devastating power. Ethan swiped the display to the side and brought up the next prototype, Ice Dragon. This unit was a study in stark contrast. Its body took on a frosted white glow, as though carved from pure glacier ice. Fine veins of azure ran beneath its translucent scales, pulsing faintly as chilled air swirled around it. Sleek and aerodynamic, the Ice Dragon was designed not only for close combat, but also to harness and channel cryogenic energy. With its native, cold power, it could freeze targets solid in an instant or take to the sky on a frigid thermal vortex, making it the perfect control unit on the battlefield. Ethan leaned back, absorbing the details. Reproducing these tegu devices, and even pushing them beyond their current limits, was now within his grasp. All it would take was time, resources, and that supercharged mind of his. Ethan led Esdeath to the edge of the chamber, where a massive beast lay coiled on a platform of frozen mist. "This is the ice dragon," he announced. Its eyes glowed a piercing, glacier blue, as if a single glance could shatter the air into frost. Two enormous wings of solid ice arched from its back, their translucent membranes draped with jagged crystals. Ethan twitched a finger toward them. One beat of those wings, and it could whip up a full-blown snowstorm. He ned to a second enclosure and tapped the glass. "And this is the Thunderfire Dragon, our heavy hitter." The creature's body was sheathed in metallic scales that caught every stray beam of light and refracted it like polished steel. Its eyes burned a deep, infernal red, twin embers promising violence. Every so often, a spark of lightning danced along its barbed tail, which ended in a second, snake-like head that hissed crackling arcs of electricity. From its cavernous maw, it could unleash torrents of flame hot enough to turn stone to cinder. Ethan's voice brimmed with pride. Esdeath watched both dragons with a satisfied smile. These were not ordinary Tegu. They were living, bio-engineered weapons, and none required a human wielder. "They're highly intelligent," Ethan added. "They'll follow orders without hesitation and can even fight on their own." Esdeath nodded, clearly impressed by the prospect of having three autonomous near unstoppable dragons at her command. Unlike ordinary biological Tegu, these constructs can regenerate even if their cores are destroyed. Short of utterly annihilating their bodies, they are effectively immortal. Ethan relinquished control to Esdeath. Her very first order was to have the three bio-Tegu encircle her. She intended to personally gauge their strength and combat prowess. Ethan merely nodded. This was classic Esdeath. "Come, entertain me," she called out. At her signal, the three-headed Tegu charged. Esdeath didn't even flinch. She vanished the instant they closed in. Then, in the blink of an eye, she reappeared atop the steel dragon's massive head. With a single, powerful kick, she drove her heel through its skull, tearing a wide breach in the armor plating. At the same moment, she summoned an ice blade in mid-air and brought it down like a guillotine, slicing straight through the dragon's metal cranium. The towering construct toppled, its bulk crashing onto the ground. Sparks flew as it writhed, trying to rise. Esdeath wasted no time. She leapt down and stomped on its chest, driving a foot into the trembling machinery beneath. With a final, agonized shriek, the iron dragon shattered, its body exploding into a spray of molten metal shards. Though the smoke cleared, the steel dragon's core still gleamed at the center of its wrecked form, and its body was already knitting itself back together. Ethan couldn't help but smirk. He deliberately focused his last strike on the nerves and soft tissue around the dragon's heart, sparing the core itself. He wanted to see exactly how it would respond. "All right, let's try this," he murmured. At his command, the ice dragon reared behind him, its enormous maw gaping. A howling blast of frigid wind and spindrift snow roared toward the steel beast like a miniature blizzard. Swift as lightning, Ethan darted out of the way, and before the wind had even died, he reappeared at the ice dragon's flank. He gripped his sword with both hands and brought it crashing down. The dragon's foreclaws snapped up to block the blow, but they shattered under his blade, cleanly cut through bone and sinew. With a roar of triumph, Ethan pivoted and delivered a vicious backhand slice. The dragon's head flew free and its body collapsed in a frosty heap. Even as the shards of ice scattered, the dragon's core pulsed once more, drawing the shattered pieces back together. Sparks of blue light danced over the broken ribs as the creature began to reform. "Not done yet," Ethan said, cocking his blade. No warning came. Then, in the next heartbeat, the air behind him crackled with raw energy. The Thunderfire dragon had arrived. Its scales flickered with electric blue and molten crimson as it lunged for Ethan's back. Ethan watched from the command platform as the Thunderfire dragon, the last of his three Imperial bioweapons, unleashed its power. The serpent-like head at the end of its coiling tail crackled to life, hurling a jagged bolt of lightning straight at Esdeath. At the same moment, its cavernous maw spewed a torrent of molten flame as if determined to melt her bones. Death didn't even flinch. She let the conflagration and thunderous shock wash over her, and for an instant, fire and lightning wrapped around her like a deadly embrace. Then, just as suddenly, both forces evaporated midair. The Thunderfire dragon recoiled in disbelief. How could such a full-power assault do nothing? Before the creature could recover, Esdeath appeared atop its head. With one thunderous punch, she drove its skull down into its own armored torso. The impact was bone-shattering. Even the other two Imperial bioweapons, the Iron Dragon and the Ice Dragon, staggered in shock at her display of raw strength. Ethan's jaw clenched. These three living war machines, if unleashed on any ordinary foe, or even the infamous General Bud, would have wiped the battlefield clean. Yet here they lay wounded, forced to scramble back to their feet under Esdeath's indomitable will. He took a steadying breath. The real battle was only just beginning, and Ethan, young though he was, meant to see it through. Not bad for his recovery speed, Esdeath remarked, a satisfied smile curling her lips. Chapter 476, The Tatsumi Trio. Esdeath stood in the vast council chamber, her eyes fixed on the three empty pedestals where the biological Tegu had once rested. With those weapons now in her possession, she was already turning her attention to the next phase of the Empire's expansion, a fresh wave of recruitment. Ethan, renowned for his genius-level intellect, stepped forward. "My next project is the improved Imperial gear," he announced, spreading blueprints across the table. "Think of it as an upgraded, armor-type Tegu." He tapped a schematic highlighting reinforced plating and streamlined joint servos. "This model will offer our soldiers better protection and mobility on the battlefield." Esdeath nodded. "Recruitment is underway," she said, "but we'll need to upgrade the way we treat and train our troops as well. Better gear, better pay, better conditions. Otherwise, we'll never attract the kind of soldiers we need." Ethan smiled. "I agree. You understand the Army's needs more than anyone. No lecture necessary there." He cleared his throat. "There's one more structural change I recommend. Our current chain of command relies on a single marshal overseeing everything. I propose replacing that system with a council of 3 generals who report directly to you." Esdeath raised an eyebrow. 3 generals? Isn't that a bit excessive?" "Not at all," Ethan replied. "Each general will check and balance the others, creating 3 sturdy pillars to support the entire military hierarchy. It ensures no single person wields unchecked power, and it streamlines decision-making in the field." She considered the idea for a moment, then smiled. "Very well, Ethan. Let's build our Tatsumi trio. Together, they'll hold this empire aloft." With that, the two strategists set to work, drawing up the final plans that would reshape the Imperial Army for years to come. Queen Esdeath studied the parchment before her, brow furrowed. "So you propose we cap the number of senior officers, 3 generals and 7 admirals?" Ethan, standing at attention opposite her desk, nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. 3 general posts under the Commander-in-Chief and 7 admirals. This structure will foster competition, preventing any one officer from growing too powerful." Esdeath tapped her finger on the table. "But why limit them? Won't that only breed infighting? If they're constantly vying for promotion, the Empire could tear itself apart from within." Ethan inclined his head. "Precisely. With fixed ranks, they'll keep each other in check. Ambition without unity can be dangerous, but a system of checks and balances keeps the balance of power stable. Every officer knows there are only so many seats at the table. They'll be far more cautious about rebellion," the Queen sighed. "And what if caution fails? What if they stage a coup, or worse, plunge the provinces into civil war?" Ethan's expression remained calm. "Leave that to me, Your Majesty. I intend to make an example of any who stir sedition. The threat of swift, decisive justice is the best deterrent." Esdeath closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose. An empire beset by constant purges and public executions is hardly better than one divided by revolt. You can't kill everyone who disagrees with you. A soft tsk was Ethan's only reply. Leaning back in her chair, the Queen's shoulders slumped. Being sovereign had its burdens, unrelenting, complex, and unending. She thought of Emperor Ernest, whose casual indifference had left half the empire in disarray. Esdeath refused to follow in his footsteps. She would not allow her realm to crumble through neglect or internal strife. At least, she still had her master's guidance to rely on. She forced herself upright and met Ethan's steady gaze. "Very well. Implement the new command structure, but keep your promise, suppress any rebellion before it starts, and spare the innocent whenever possible." "Understood, Your Majesty," Ethan replied. Esdeath exhaled and turned back to her maps and ledgers. The path ahead would be treacherous, but with firm angst and a determined hand at the helm, she resolved that the Empire's future would be defined by strength and order rather than chaos. Ethan had never cared for crowns or conquests. His ambition lay in cultivating the perfect queen. Esdeath leaned in, her legs wrapping around his waist as she pressed close. "Master," she murmured, voice low and sultry, "don't you want to taste the power and pleasure of ruling beside a queen of a great empire?" He smiled wryly, brushing a lock of her silvery hair from her face. "A queen? Or you mean an empress?" he asked, amusement in his tone. "I've met them all. They command entire galaxies, countless worlds more powerful than your little realm. Frankly, they're hardly worth my notice." Her breath hitched at his words. Over the countless battles they'd fought side by side, Ethan had unwittingly chipped away at her icy resolve. Now she felt a fierce possessiveness, a hunger not to destroy him, but to claim him utterly. And yet, when he spoke of infinite worlds beyond their reach, a sudden fear seized her, the thought that he might one day slip away, chasing some grander destiny. Esdeath tightened her hold, voice trembling as she whispered into his ear, "Infinite galaxies, endless kingdoms. Master, would you ever leave me behind?" "I'm just your plaything?" Ethan's voice was low, edged with quiet challenge. Esdeath's pale blue eyes sparkled with amusement. "I don't doubt you," she replied. "You strike me as someone too proud to lie. Whether you become a mere trinket or a treasured possession depends entirely on your performance. Which do you think you'll be?" Ethan lifted his chin, the flicker of a confident smile playing on his lips. "Don't worry, my queen. I will prove myself to be your most precious plaything." Esdeath's smile widened, cool and expectant. "We shall see." The recruitment drive was a resounding success. Under Esdeath's command, the Empire, its coffers depleted and its armies scattered, had thrown itself into a massive mobilization. Esdeath, more warrior than sovereign, had dispatched flyers to every corner of the land, promising glory and reward to all who would take up arms. A month later, the capital pulsed with the energy of freshly enlisted soldiers. Barracks overflowed, training grounds buzzed, and taverns brimmed with eager youths sharing tales of valor yet to be won. Among the tide of new recruits were 3 young swordsmen, Tasmi, Ayez, and Sayu, who had journeyed from their remote village. They had come to save their home from famine and banditry, and now at last they stood shoulder to shoulder with Ethan and the Empire's forces. Above the din, banners fluttered with Esdeath's emblem. Town criers proclaimed, "Her Majesty the Queen is about to conquer the foreign nations to the north." Hope and trepidation spread through the ranks in equal measure, as every man and woman prepared to write their names into history under Esdeath's iron banner, and to discover just how precious a plaything could become. "Now's our chance to earn glory," Sayu exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. She'd always admired Queen Esdeath. Her rise to power had inspired countless women to take up arms for the Empire. Esdeath's charisma was unmatched. Without it, she'd never have faced so little opposition on the way to the throne. Ethan exchanged a glance with Tasmi. Sayu turned back to them. "Don't worry. Between the two of you, there's no force that can stop us. We'll secure the reward, save that village, and make our names." Ayez nodded eagerly. "Absolutely." Tasmi couldn't hide his grin. The 3 of them brimmed with confidence, so much so that none expected what came next. They were summoned not as ordinary soldiers, but as Imperial arms envoys. Publicly, however, their official title would be far simpler: Royal Knights. A Royal Knight? They looked at one another, puzzled. The officer who delivered the summons beamed at them with envy. "Consider the Royal Knights the Empire's greatest innovation. We've reverse-engineered the old Empire's Tegu technology to create new equipment that can stand toe-to-toe, even outmatch, a true Tegu user once you're armed with it. You 3 will be the first to wield this power." Ethan and the other 2 recruits stared at each other in disbelief. They'd just been appointed straight to the Royal Knights, an almost unheard-of stroke of luck. "Wait, what exactly is an Imperial equipment user?" one of them finally asked. The 3 of them were still reeling. Having grown up in remote villages, they'd never even heard of Imperial or Minister equipment users. Their new instructor, a seasoned veteran, had already demonstrated his strength by dispatching a first-class dangerous species in seconds flat. In the Empire's rankings, First-class creatures are the most formidable threats below the super and special dangerous tiers. It was clear their mentor was anything but ordinary. "You've never heard of an Imperial equipment user?" The officer sneered, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "You must be from the boonies." With a roll of his eyes, he tossed a slim, leather-bound booklet onto the table in front of them. "Here, read this. It's the Empire's official compendium on Imperial and Minister equipment users, plus every dangerous species we've cataloged. Only officers get their hands on this." He crossed his arms and offered them a crooked grin. "Consider it a welcome gift. Study it well, will you?" As he turned away, he couldn't help but think how insanely generous, bordering on reckless, he'd been. That information was worth a small fortune and could easily become a family heirloom. Yet here it was, in the hands of 3 green recruits. Only commissioned officers have access to this training. It's simply too specialized to offer widely. So, following Ethan's directives, Esdeath has founded a military academy where recruits learn both civil administration and battlefield tactics. Still, talent is in short supply, and the nobility's stranglehold on advancement remains unbroken. The answer? Open a school. One young recruit stepped forward, shifting nervously. Sorry, he admitted with an awkward smile, but we can't read." The officer in charge fell silent, taken aback. Chapter 477, Royal Knights. At last, thanks to the officer's patient explanations and the detailed booklet he'd given them, Tasmi, Ayes, and Sayu finally understood the difference between Tegu users and vassals. The booklet was as thick as a standard dictionary and nearly the same size. Every entry was accompanied by lifelike portraits so clear you could recognize the subjects at a glance. Alongside descriptions of each Tegu, it even contained profiles of wanted criminals in the Empire of Ernest, though naturally, the officer hadn't bothered to lecture them on that. "So the Royal Knight is that powerful?" Ayes asked, eyes shining. "He can slaughter hundreds all by himself?" The others nodded. Sure, the 3 of them were no joke. They could dispatch a first-class threat in an instant, but even they wouldn't stand a chance against a battalion. A single Tegu user, however, could face down hundreds of soldiers without breaking a sweat. Legend said Esdeath herself once single-handedly routed an army of 100,000. She schemed, struck, and cut them down until none remained. They'd all risked their lives to get here. Now, armed with new knowledge, they could hardly contain their excitement. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Royal Knights training ground. As he stepped through the gates, he saw dozens of other recruits already assembling on the lawn, some stretching, some sparring in pairs, others practicing basic drills. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows over polished armor and gleaming weapons. Ethan squared his shoulders. This was it, his first day among the Royal Knights. Ethan surveyed the Empire's roster of talented operatives with a critical eye. In the original plot, the planned night raid had never come together, and only Najehitan's betrayal was on record, so identifying the other conspirators promised to be straightforward. The real challenge lay in matching each recruit to the right role. Fortunately, the Royal Knights boasted both elite melee fighters and deadly ranged specialists, and Maine was perfect for a long-distance assignment. A sudden cry drew Ethan's attention. Haitong burst into the courtyard, breathless and wide-eyed. "Sister!" Ahead of her stood Chi-Tong, known in underground circles as the Red Tongue. Chi-Tong's own summons to the capital had filled her with uncertainty. She still hadn't encountered Najehitan and had no idea what to expect. Now, faced with the sister she'd thought lost forever, her emotions spun out of control. "Haitong!" Chi-Tong whispered, her voice trembling. Haitong closed the distance in 2 strides, her grin radiating joy. "From today on, we stay together. We'll form the Royal Knights Assassination Corps." Chi-Tong blinked, scarcely daring to believe it. Separated in childhood, each had lived in the dark about the other's fate. Chi-Tong barely registered the promise of a deadly new unit. The only thing she truly cared about was standing side by side with her sister at last. Ethan stared out the narrow window at the dozen new recruits forming ranks in the courtyard below. As long as he could stay by Haitong's side, no task, no matter how perilous, was beyond his reach. After all, assassination was his specialty. "Master," came Esdeath's soft whisper at his ear. She'd slipped into the room behind him, draping herself against his back. Do you find those two sisters appealing? He turned in her arms, a wry smile tugging at his lips. You're in an especially playful mood tonight, Lady Esdeath. She tucked a stray lock of her pale hair behind his ear, pressing close in the cramped guest house she'd secured for them. It wasn't hard to guess why she'd called him here. Of the half-dozen warriors Esdeath had recently recruited, nearly all were breathtaking women of varied origins. Natural silk, whose fluid movements concealed astonishing strength. Ma Yin, the fierce foreign knight whose cold gaze bore the weight of 100 battles. And in the rear stood the minister's daughter, her armor stained and scarred from a brutal encounter with the beast war. Ryers, one savage blow had nearly cost her life, yet she'd fought on, swinging that massive axe as though it were a toy. Ethan's smile faded. You have the luxury of favoring them, he said softly, but my mind is elsewhere. He ran a hand through his dark hair, thinking of Haitong's frail form, the pallor of her skin, the tremble in her hands. He'd faced down tyrants and monsters, but curing her mysterious ailment felt like the greatest challenge of all. Esdeath's embrace grew firmer. Then let us focus on her, she vowed. Whatever you need to restore her health, we will find it. He met her steady gaze and nodded. I won't rest until Haitong is well again, he promised. No matter what stands in our way, be it corrupt ministers, rampaging beast warriors, or death itself. With resolve burning in his chest, Ethan rose. Esdeath slipped her hand into his, sharing his determination. Together, they would defy any darkness that threatened the woman he loved most, and the real battle was only just beginning. Haitong had no choice but to accept Ethan's withdrawal reaction challenge if she ever hoped to see Chitong again. The road to recovery was agonizing, far worse than any toxin coursing through an insect's veins, but her determination to be reunited with her sister carried her through. When at last she emerged from the grip of addiction, her relief was palpable. To Ethan, reuniting the two sisters had always been a matter of will, and now at last the reunion was within reach. Esdeath regarded him with an amused smile. You're exceptionally busy, Ethan, she teased, but even in your schedule, you've found time to witness the master's grand design? Of course, Ethan replied. Shall we? In the courtyard beyond the palace gates, Ethan's latest gambit was already taking shape. He'd secured a detachment of royal knights, legendary warriors who, on their own, could rout entire battalions. But only through disciplined cooperation with his own elite assassination corps would they unleash their true potential. Together, knight and assassin would be able to shatter even the most formidable cavalry charges and break through lines that any ordinary army would fear. Esdeath watched the troops assemble and train side by side with keen interest. She understood as well as he did that this unprecedented alliance could shift the balance of power across the realm. Yet she could not dismiss the possibility that Ethan's real motive was to stake out his own claim to sovereignty. Nearby, Lord Ma Yin, who had once dismissed the foreign-born magician, stood quietly aghast. He never imagined that a stranger, even one as resourceful as Esdeath, could earn the throne's ear so swiftly. And so, beneath the afternoon sun, the assassins and knights drilled in unison, forging a partnership whose echoes would soon be felt far beyond these palace walls. Ethan had endured endless bullying. As he grew older and finally grasped why the people of the Empire shunned him, he resolved to change everything. His intentions were not bad, but all too often he'd backed the wrong allies. Now, however, fortune had placed him in the Royal Knights, an order steeped in honor and prestige. Ethan didn't know what to say when he received the news, but he understood this was his one real chance. Determined, he threw himself into his training with everything he had. The Royal Knights wielded living tegu, mystical weapons born of their wielders' souls. Unlike ordinary tegu, these could be tamed, never turning on their hosts or causing the dreaded erosion that drove many to madness. To keep their power from spiraling out of control, each Royal Knight's tegu underwent a process known as molecular castration, a surgical technique that permanently blocked the weapon's capacity for mutation. Once sealed, however, the tegu could be shaped to reflect the wielder's deepest needs. Ma Yin's became a massive cannon, its barrel resembling a carved pumpkin. Sayu's crystallized into a sleek bow and arrow set, perfect for long-range precision. Tasmi's took the form of an enormous broadsword, each swing threatening to split mountains. Ayaz followed a similar path, manifesting a heavy greatsword of his own. Leonai, ever the hand-to-hand combatant, saw his tegu emerge as a pair of gauntlets bristling with retractable claws. And then there was Ethan. His tegu, forged from that same molecularly castrated core, crystallized into Murasame, an elegantly lethal katana famed for its single-strike lethality. In fact, Murasame was so prized that even Akatomi, who had long wielded the revered Japanese blade Kirichimonji, relinquished it in favor of Ethan's devastating weapon. Standing among these legendary warriors, each bonded to their living tegu, Ethan felt the weight of his new life settle onto his shoulders. This was more than an honor. It was his shot at reshaping the Empire from the inside out, and he would not squander it. Chapter 12. Unhealable Wounds. Though it lacked the outright lethality of the legendary Tegu Murasame, the sword still bore a terrible curse. Any cut it dealt would never fully heal. When the blade's owner joined forces with the Black Four Sisters, each wielding the formidable March of the Dead technique from the 8th house, their combined strength became the stuff of nightmares. At the Royal Knights training grounds, no one was spared. Mornings began before dawn with resistance drills, running against weighted sleds, dragging tires uphill, followed by relentless swordplay and hand-to-hand combat. By midday, bruised and gasping, the cadets would repeat the cycle, sweat stinging their eyes. Esdeath wanted her knights tough enough to withstand anything the battlefield could throw at them. Every so often, Queen Esdeath herself would materialize at the edge of the arena. With a casual nod, she'd step onto the field and spar with her subordinates, demonstrating in seconds precisely how far they still had to go. She ruled with a curious blend of sternness and genuine concern. She expected perfection, but she also made sure no one went hungry or slept on an empty stomach. She hadn't read any leadership manuals, but she'd studied human nature and used kindness and discipline in equal measure. Ethan leaned against the wooden railing, watching the two sisters circle each other. Their blades sang through the air, weaving near misses so close that sparks flew. He remembered the night he'd faced Murasame for the first time, the frozen flash of blue steel, the cold slice that refused to close. His heart still thudded at the memory. Beside him, his fellow knight Tatsumi wiped sweat from his brow and sighed. Honestly, must we train like this to protect Her Majesty? It feels overkill. Ethan raised an eyebrow. We've seen what her enemies can do. I'd rather have too much training than not enough. Before Tatsumi could reply, the Prime Minister, Lord Basil, strode in, robes billowing. He surveyed the exhausted cadets with calm contempt. Necessary? He repeated, tone sharp. Of course it's necessary. If Her Majesty had to do everything herself, then what purpose do we serve as her ministers? Tatsumi bowed his head under Basil's glare. Ethan looked on, hand tightening around his sword's hilt. He didn't dare speak up. Not yet. As Basil turned and swept away, Ethan met Tatsumi's eyes. Both of them knew that the Queen's roads were paved with sweat, steel, and unwavering resolve, and that to survive here, they'd have to endure far more than they'd ever imagined. Ethan's childhood friend Shayo was doing surprisingly well here, and, best of all, no one treated him with prejudice. That alone made Ethan feel this place was truly welcoming. Yet Shayo had been utterly won over by Esdeath's blend of benevolence and iron resolve. He'd become her most devoted follower. When Tatsumi offered Esdeath a warm smile, she gave no sign of acknowledgement. She was already preparing to assume Ethan's form. How could she possibly react to anything else? Chapter 478. A crushing blow. The Royal Knights, the elite assassin corps, the 3 living weapons of the Empire, and 500,000 freshly conscripted troops all gathered beneath Esdeath's banner. With an iron resolve, she led this unprecedented force northward. Waiting for her at the Empire's old frontier garrisons was the army that had first sworn fealty to her, already buzzing with excitement at the news that she'd unified the realm and proclaimed it the Imperial Kingdom. To them, it felt only right that the Empire's greatest general should now wear its crown. Word of Esdeath's ascent struck panic into her enemies. The Revolutionary Army and Ningdao's insurgents immediately dispatched envoys to the Northern Coalition states, warning them that the imperial juggernaut was on the move. At the same time, they began recruiting local workers and villagers along the main supply arteries. training them in simple acts of sabotage, severing communications, ambushing supply convoys, and planting false guides to lead Imperial units astray. Far to the north, the foreign kingdoms reacted with alarm. Prince Numasika, known throughout the ice fields as the Warrior of the North, took personal command of his defenses. He ordered every fortress at the border reinforced, dispatched scouts into the frozen wilds, and readied his cavalry for rapid strikes. Villages were evacuated behind defensive lines, siege engines were hauled into position. Every soldier knew a titanic confrontation was brewing on the horizon. As Esdeath's vast host rolled ever forward, the stage was set for a clash that would decide the fate of nations. Neither blade nor siege tower had yet been blooded, but when those first blows fell, they would echo across the world. Ethan had never once tasted defeat when he stood behind his rifle. Time and again, in the most desperate of circumstances, his tactical genius turned hopeless skirmishes into resounding victories, and his people believed in him without question. From the ramparts of Frosthold, his family's impregnable fortress city, he launched his campaign into the Empire, confident that no army could stand against him. His reputation only grew with each triumph. Handsome, composed, and unfailingly gallant in his dealings, Ethan became the stuff of legends and of countless fan tales that celebrated his courage and charm. But no legend, however grand, can withstand the fury of a determined foe. That foe emerged in the form of Esdeath, commander of the Empire's Northern Legion, and her 3 Imperial weapon-bearers, known as the Beast Warriors. When their assault descended, lightning flashing across a storm-dark sky, it shattered the defenses of Frosthold in a single terrifying onslaught. Walls crumbled, watchtowers toppled, and Ethan's soldiers, outnumbered and stunned, fell by the thousands. In the end, even Ethan's steely nerves could not save him. Captured amid the smoking ruins, he was executed where he stood. Esdeath's order was merciless. 400,000 of Frosthold's surviving tribesmen were buried alive, their bodies entombed in the permafrost she summoned with her icy powers. With Esdeath's 500,000 troops added to the Empire's northern forces, their ranks swelled to nearly 1 million soldiers, an unstoppable juggernaut poised to sweep across the borderlands. The news of Frosthold's fall spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through every willing yet trembling heart in the realm. Yet even in defeat, hope endured. Within the Empire's vast territories, the Revolutionary Army recognized the key to turning the tide: strike at the enemy's lifeblood. Under cover of darkness, they sabotaged supply lines, ambushed convoy after convoy, and demolished the roads that fed the Imperial war machine. Aqueducts were dammed, granaries burned. Every means, no matter how small, was employed to slow the Empire's relentless advance. For though Frosthold had fallen, and Ethan lay silent beneath the ice, his spirit lived on in those who refused to surrender. And as long as the revolution held its nerve, the Empire's triumph was far from assured. A successful strike will require a small, highly trained team, experts in infiltration and rapid response operations. The Imperial Artifact Master Corps is exactly the force for the job. Over the past few years, the Revolutionary Army has poured its resources into assembling such a unit, collecting every Imperial artifact it could find so they'd have the edge for a mission just like this. Their urgency is understandable. Should Esdeath succeed in quelling the uprising among the northern tribes, the Revolutionary Army stands to lose its most fervent recruits. After all these years of fanning the flames of rebellion, their ultimate goal has always been to overthrow the Empire and claim the throne for themselves. Now, just as their long-cherished plan seems within reach, Esdeath's swift ascension to Queen threatens to snatch victory from their grasp. Worse still, her recent string of royal edicts has strengthened the Empire's hold on key territories. The Revolutionary Army's principalses are now at risk of collapse. They realize that if they wait any longer, Esdeath's reforms will starve them of manpower and resources. They must act quickly, before the Empire's far-flung garrisons fully grasp the situation. By igniting conflict simultaneously across multiple fronts, they hope to stretch Esdeath's forces thin and reopen the opportunity for rebellion. In the days ahead, every province will become a battlefield, and the Imperial Artifact Masters are their dagger poised at the Empire's back. They had spun an elaborate ruse. a series of coordinated sabotage attacks across the empire, designed to draw the capital's forces away and give the northern tribes the opening they needed to strike the empire's already battered army. It was a desperate gambit, deception on a grand scale, but one they carried out with ruthless efficiency. Meanwhile, Minister Ernest and his son, Sheila, had caught wind of the scheme. "Father," Sheila asked as they studied the latest reports, "do you think Esdeath still wields any real power in the capital?" Just then, the company of soldiers Sheila had brought with him erupted into chaos. They'd been promised a victory feast and lavish rewards, but instead found themselves ordered back to the city to carry out dangerous raids. Feeling cheated, they balked and began to mutiny. Ernest said nothing. With a calm nod, he summoned the 4 Rakshasa phantoms. Though the official archives spoke poorly of their methods, there was no denying their prowess. Even the Empire's trained armament users, Tatsumi among them, could not hope to stand against a single phantom one-on-one. But together, those 4 were unstoppable, capable of cutting through any ordinary force. Only the Empire's elite, champions like Esdeath herself, stood beyond their reach. Within moments, the phantoms descended on the mutineers, quelling the uprising with swift, merciless precision. And as the ringleaders were carried away, Ernest turned back to his son. Sheila met his gaze. No words were needed. If Esdeath still held sway in the capital, they would find her and deal with her in time. Scylla crouched before his father, eyes downcast. He hadn't always been so dutiful, but lately he'd grown into the role of the perfect son, respectful, attentive, eager to please. His father, once stern and distant, now looked at him with pride. "Esdeath," Scylla whispered, uncertain. At that moment, Ernest was leaning back in his chair, deep in thought. His gaze drifted toward the grand model of the Imperial Equipment Library displayed on the table. "If Esdeath is away from the capital," he mused aloud, "we could launch a surprise strike. No one would suspect us until it was too late." He tapped a finger against the ivory tower of the library. "Once we seize a cache of Imperial arms, we'll control one flank of the Empire, or more, and all the while I'll remain comfortably hidden, enjoying my spoils." He chuckled softly. "As for facing Esdeath directly, I'd rather live out my days in peace and die of old age than risk another duel with her." He shoved a roasted leg of meat into his mouth with a smack. "Let's head back to the capital," he declared around a mouthful. Money and women held no appeal for him. His sole passion was meat. Having grown up with little to eat, he was making up for every missed meal now. Across the room, Esdeath sifted through fresh reports. Rival warlords hurled accusations and threats at her, each more venomous than the last. She found it all quite amusing. She knew better than to simply swallow their bait. After all, Ethan had always told her, when your enemy warns you not to do something, that's the moment to do it. Hit them where it hurts most. With a smirk, Esdeath set aside the dispatches. Let them scramble in fury and fear. She had her own plans to execute. And come dawn, the world would once again see why no one dared stand in her way. The Empire lay in ruins, desperately in need of reconstruction. At this point, a few more setbacks mattered little. Things could only get worse before they got better. Once the dust settled, the real work of rebuilding would begin. Unmoved by the uprisings and rebellions flaring across the realm, Esdeath pressed her forces onward with unbending resolve. It was the revolutionary army that began to falter under the weight of her advance. On one front, a squad of Imperial weapon wielders burst into another force's camp, only to find themselves staring down a line of silver-white royal knights. "You damned rebels," one knight thundered. Tatsumi hefted his greatsword and swung, but every blow glanced harmlessly off the polished armor. "What is this?" one of the Imperial weapon users muttered in disbelief. A new Imperial weapon? None of them had ever seen such armor before. It looked like a suit forged from an Imperial weapon of the armor class, yet its craftsmanship and sheen were unlike anything in their records. Could it be a ministerial weapon lost to history, now returned to the battlefield? The thought sent a chill through the Revolutionary Army's ranks. Even though the government-issued weapons couldn't match the divine arms in every respect, their sheer numbers and the bizarre variety among them made them unpredictable. No one knew exactly how many ministerial weapons were out there, but these agents all wore the same silver armor, giving away none of their individual strengths. Quit stalling, you idiot, Ethan snarled. He squeezed the trigger, and a searing beam of energy tore through the nearest Tegu user's chest. The man stared in shock at the gaping hole as he crumpled to the ground, eyes frozen wide in disbelief. The others are down, Tatsumi, Ethan reported, his voice calm. A moment later, Sao returned, cradling a fallen Tegu. Securing an enemy's weapon was a major victory. Now every Tegu that opposed them lay safely in their hands. Chapter 479, Total Annihilation. Ethan leaned over the holotable, studying the Empire's new recycling program schematics. It wasn't about salvaging scrap, it was a blueprint for assembling elite assassination squads. From this point forward, the Empire's frontline force would consist solely of Royal Knights, each variant tailored to a specific battlefield role. The Royal Knights would be organized into 6 distinct classes. 1. Black Knight clad in matte black heavy armor and wielding a gargantuan sword, the Black Knights are the ultimate defensive bulwark. Nearly impervious to all but the most devastating attacks, they advance inexorably through enemy lines. 2. Blue Knight, coated in shimmering cobalt plating, the Blue Knights trade armor and raw power for incredible speed. They slice across the battlefield like a gale, striking with lightning-quick precision before any foe can react. Number 3. Red Knight, striking a balance between offense and defense, the Red Knights lack the Black's endurance and the Blue's velocity, but in pure combat potency, they outmatch them all. Their mighty blades and reinforced gauntlets deliver blows that can shatter shields. 4. Green Knight. These are the Empire's mobile artillery platforms. Outfitted with rapid-fire machine guns, missile pods, and long-range energy cannons, Green Knights lay waste to targets from afar, softening defenses before the others move in. 5. Silver Knight. Engineered for perfection, Silver Knights combine the Black Knight's resilience, the Blue Knight's agility, and the Red Knight's striking power. Their adaptive armor and multifunctional weapon arrays make them the most versatile units on the roster. 6. Golden Knight. An even further refinement of the silver design, Golden Knights push every performance metric to the limit. Faster, tougher, and deadlier in every way, they stand as the Empire's crowning achievement in mech engineering. Ethan's heart pounded as he reviewed the specs. With these 6 variants coordinated in flawless formation, absolute annihilation would no longer be a distant threat. It would become the Empire's standard procedure. With the Royal Knights at her back, Esdith's fledgling empire could soon outlast the Empire itself. For over 1,000 years, the Empire has depended on the 48 Imperial gears for its might. It boggles the mind that Esdith now wields weapons even more potent, especially when her Royal Knights have existed for barely a fraction of that time. Meanwhile, Ernest and his companions keep colliding with the Minister's punishment squad, Brand, Leva, and Will, who refuse to let them escape. And with Ethan serving as their guide, there is nowhere they can go without the squad in pursuit. Using the precise coordinates of Sheila's refuge in the Imperial capital, they charted their return and arranged to meet the Imperial army en route. By staging the rendezvous at a halfway point, they've ensured that even if Esdith learns of their plans, she won't know when or where the assault will occur. "Imperial army, over here!" Ernest called out, his voice echoing down the familiar forest path. He still worried that Esdith might discover the palace's true location and force its relocation, but as they drew nearer, it became clear. The Imperial Palace lay undefended, and their chance to strike was at hand. Ethan flung open the heavy doors, expecting to find the Imperial armory, and instead found nothing but an empty chamber. He cursed under his breath. Damn it. Only then did the truth strike him. It wasn't that the Tegu vault had been left unguarded, but that Esdith had already moved the Tegu here herself. No guards were needed. Clearly, this place was special enough for her to keep entirely to herself. A chilling voice cut through the silence. "At last I've found you, traitors!" Brand descended from above, shrouded in darkness. The evil spirit within him had warped his body. Massive, leathery, dragon-like wings unfurled from his back, lifting him effortlessly into the air. Beneath him stood Ethan's companions, Will and Zach, Levi bracing themselves. Scylla, standing just behind them, offered a grim smile. 3 against 1. It was too good to be true. She glanced at her father. "Looks like a trap." Before anyone could react, Brand lunged forward, His gauntleted arm shot out and punched clean through the chest of the nearest figure, a bloated man in garish circus attire. The corpse collapsed in a heap, blood spattering the stone floor. That man had been called Champ, a deranged killer clown who revered children as angels, only to murder them before they could grow into corrupt adults. Now he lay dead, a victim of the very betrayal he himself had perfected. Will tightened his grip on his sword. Levi drew his pistols. Ethan steadied himself, determined not to let Brand's ambush break their resolve. Scylla's eyes burned with defiance. Trap or not, they would not go down without a fight. Ethan had once tortured and slaughtered Lan's students, a crime that cost him his life when Lan finally tracked him down and exacted her revenge. But before his death, Ethan leaked detailed intelligence on Lan and her remaining allies to the Minister's crusade team. Now Brand and his 4 companions had arrived at the hidden encampment, and they intended to leave no survivors. The crusade team's chief asset was Brand himself, ruthless, relentless, and eager to make an example. Beside him stood Levi, whose command over nearby water currents, though modest, added a useful edge to the assault. Will took up a position at the rear, sealing off any route of escape. Finally, the sorceress Sheila hovered nearby, fingers already tracing the runes of her dimensional phalanx Shangri-La. Before they struck, Sheila summoned from her pouch the legendary Tegu known as Fast Throw Ranma, nicknamed the Big Thrower. It consisted of 6 jade spheres, each aligned to one of 6 primal forces: Storm Jade, Explosion Jade, Flame Jade, Ice and Snow Jade, Lightning Strike Jade, Corrosion Jade. Each sphere unleashed its unique power when hurled and then returned to its wielder's hand, ready for the next cast. Brand led the charge. One of Lan's fiercest defenders, known only as Champ, rushed forward with a battle cry of his own. But Brand met him without hesitation. In a single brutal motion, he wrenched the young man's armor aside, ripped out his entrails, and tossed the body to the muddy ground. Plate cracked, blood spattered. Champ stared up at Brand with disbelief. "What?" His voice choked off in pain. Brand loomed over him. "You earned this, and there will be no pity." He gave a curt nod, as though dismissing an audience, then turned to the others. "Finish them." At Brand's signal, Levi thrust out his hands. A surge of swirling droplets lashed across the clearing, pinning Lan's guerrillas to the spot. Even so, it was Will's wards, solid, unbreakable sigils scorched into the earth that sealed every exit. Escape was impossible. Moments later, the survivors lay battered, broken, and defeated. Brand sheathed his blade, breathing heavily. "All of you deserve this fate. Now, bring them through." Sheila wasted no time. She chanted in a tongue older than most kingdoms, and at her feet a latticework of violet light sprang to life, the teleportation array of dimensional phalanx Shangri-La. The runes glowed, humming with otherworldly energy. Brand stepped forward and began hauling the wounded into the circle. "Minister will want to see them alive," he remarked coldly. As the last captive staggered in, the runes flashed one final time. In a blink, Brand and his team and their prisoners vanished, leaving the camp eerily silent under the broken sky. Ethan's shout rang out just as Brand burst from the wreckage like a cyclone. "Don't even think about running." Ethan lunged forward, but Brand was already gone. Sheila's eyes narrowed to slits. She knew what was coming, and with a curt nod, sent her guards to cut off Brand's path. They didn't want to fight him. They only obeyed in the hope that Sheila herself might slip away. Brand laughed, a low, scornful whine. Humble. In his dragon form, he felt invincible. These soldiers had been troublesome before. Now they were nothing but targets. With one thunderous punch, Brand struck the nearest warrior, Pirate Lord Yan Xin, the self-styled king of the Southern Isles. Yan Xin wielded the imperial equipment Moonlight Raimei, a scimitar-shaped sword that unleashed razor-sharp vacuum blades and grew deadliest under the light of a full moon. But before he could summon that lunar power, Brand's fist met the blade. The vacuum edge shattered into fragments, and Yan Xin's body crumpled beneath the blow. "Crush them! Let the earth itself roar!" Brand roared, claws scraping the cracked stone. At his side, Cosmia raised her Tegu, earth sound, heavy pressure. The device looked like an oversized microphone, but within it lurked devastating power. She pressed her hand to the base and let the sound coil, intensify, then erupt in a focused ultrasonic wave. A bone-shaking boom filled the chamber as the shockwave slammed toward Brand, aiming to splinter his bones and topple the draconic onslaught once and for all. Ethan barely hesitated, no more than a heartbeat, before acclimating to the ultrasonic assault. He lashed out with a single punch, unleashing a shockwave that tore through the air. Cosmia had no time to dodge. The blast sent her crashing against the far wall. Her organs were pulverized in the violence of the impact. "What kind of monster is this?" someone gasped from the sidelines. Panic flickered in Dodia's eyes. She could reshape her body at will. If she put enough distance between herself and Ethan, she'd vanish and reemerge in another form. She turned to flee. "Don't even think about running," Will shouted, barreling after her and cutting off her escape. Dotia skidded to a halt. Though she appeared as a young girl, her true age spanned centuries. Her power let her transform others into grotesque creatures bound to her will. Those same shape-shifting abilities granted her tremendous strength, but she lacked any real training in combat. Her imperial weapon, the Blood Harvester, was a set of fang-like implants fused to her jaw. With it, she could drain her victim's blood at astonishing speed, using the stolen life essence to heal her wounds and swell her power. Any one of those drained bodies could be reanimated into a mummified thrall, obedient to her every command. Will, by contrast, was an armor-class imperial weapon and a veteran of countless naval engagements. He'd been forged in the crucible of warfare, unyielding, implacable, and determined to stop Dodia before she could slip away. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to make of Dodia's sudden surge of power. Then, in one swift motion, Will's blade sliced clean through her at the waist. "Damn it! I won't stop," Dodia rasped, even as her severed lower half crumpled to the blood-soaked earth. Her upper body lurched forward, limbs jerking with terrifying strength as she tried to drag herself toward the fallen, Cosmia and the others, hoping to drink their blood and mend her wounds. Will didn't hesitate. He planted himself squarely between Dodia and the corpses, sword raised. Cold resolve steeled his voice as he said, "You've had enough. This ends here." Chapter 480, Ethan's Miraculous Evolution, Will struck without mercy, mercilessly slaying Dotia in a burst of ruthless precision. At the same time, Ethan faced a far more cunning opponent. The legendary Lian Xiang Shiyu technique proved utterly useless against this kind of femme fatale, Sheila. Sheila attempted to teleport away, but Ethan had concealed his long-range capabilities until the perfect moment. As soon as they closed the gap, he opened his mouth and unleashed a concentrated blast of energy so fierce that neither Sheila nor her ally Yi Zhang had time to react. The crackling wave of power slammed into them, shattering both of Sheila's arms in one devastating blow. "Ah, my arms!" Sheila screamed, crumpling to the ground. Despite his brute strength, enough to defeat multiple masters of the Imperial Fist Temple, he lacked endurance and could not withstand even a single strike of raw energy. Ernest, watching from the sidelines, snorted. "What a worthless piece of trash," he growled, tugging at his beard. Then, with a sharp gesture, he barked, "4 Rakshasa phantoms, seize him!" At his command, the spectral figures advanced. "Yes, Minister," they chorused, grabbing the wounded Sheila and dragging him away. Ernest turned his cold gaze back to Ethan. "Your death approaches, boy." Ethan paused, surprised to see Ernest standing on his own 2 feet. Yet he felt no fear. If anything, he doubted that Ernest could match his newfound power. A quiet confidence settled over him as he prepared for the next move in this deadly game. "You 3 are Taigu users, aren't you?" Ernest asked, his lips curling into a sneer. "So what?" Will snapped back. "In that case, this should be easy," Ernest replied coolly. With a subtle gesture, he activated his own Taigu, Iriston, the anti-Taigu. The jeweled tiara perched atop his head began to glow with a faint, ominous light. Iriston's power lay in nullifying other Taigu. When it struck, gemstones would crack and shatter, rendering their abilities useless for a full week until the fragments regenerated. No sooner had Ernest triggered Iriston than Will's Taigu and Levi's both emitted sharp, splintering sounds. Gems across their gear fractured like fragile glass. At the same instant, Ernest's own tiara disintegrated, shards clattering to the floor at his feet. The price of using Iriston was steep. The weapon destroyed itself in the process, but its effect was devastating. Rumor had it that Iriston was harvested from a super dangerous creature known for its ability to neutralize other super dangerous beings. Had there been no limits on its power, Even the first emperor might have used it to subdue legendary foes like the East China Sea's Yunzhong dragon or the ice monster. Perhaps the truly titanic adversaries remained impervious to its nullifying force. Ernest surveyed the fallen teardrops of his tiara and, without altering his expression, spoke, "Rakshasa ghosts, eliminate them." At his command, the 4 Rakshasa phantoms materialized, their eyes glowing with bloodlust. They knew this was their moment, to slaughter the now defenseless Tegu wielders before them. Chapter 7. The 4 Rakshasa Ghosts. The 4 Rakshasa ghosts, Ji, Suzuka, Zhu Tian, and Ma Tu, had spent their entire childhoods in the remote peaks of the Imperial Fist Temple, feasting on the legendary sea monsters that roamed its hidden valleys. Subjected to brutal, unending drills, they emerged as the temple's most fearsome enforcers, personal executioners of the minister, their bodies honed to lethal perfection and able to twist and reshape at will. To the world, they were known simply as the Rakshasa ghosts, those who slaughter without mercy. Their reputation was cemented when they joined forces to take down 5 rival Tegu wielders. Victorious, they seized a powerful Tegu artifact, the Teju, and delivered it to the minister, earning his unshakable trust. Naturally, when the clandestine night raid organization dared to cross the empire, the ghosts sneered at such a minor threat. Who could have imagined that beneath Night Raid's banner marched multiple Tegu masters, like Chitomi and Brand? Now, on this windswept plateau, all eyes among the ghosts and their allies rested on Brand. Capturing Night Raid's mightiest fighter would shatter the assassin's morale forever. Zhu Tian cracked his knuckles, Ji and Suzuka braced their blades, and Matu's eyes glittered with anticipation, each believing the final blow was within grasp. But Brand stood unbowed. As Zhu Tian lunged forward, chanting in ancient temple form, Brand unleashed a roar that echoed off the cliff walls. "Begone, Imperial Fist Temple's 100-split fist!" he bellowed, his fist erupting in a storm of concussive ripples. Zhu Tian's own attack, the vaunted boxing style of Huangquan Temple, met that monstrous punch head-on. In an instant, his body fractured like porcelain under a hammer, shards of bone and armor flying in all directions. "What?" Zhu Tian gasped, collapsing to his knees. Shock rippled through the ranks of the Rakshasa ghosts. Brand's shell of malevolent energy, though riddled with cracks, refused to shatter. Instead, the fissures began knitting themselves back together, the dark aura receding as if wounded but unbowed. Ji's sword slipped in his grip. Suzuka's breath caught. Even Matu's confidence wavered. The evil ghost haunting Brand's body, rumored to be nothing but a brittle curse, was regenerating before their stunned eyes. No one had expected their deadliest foe to prove so indestructible. And as the wind carried Brand's low, iron-edged laugh across the battlefield, the ghosts realized they might have underestimated Night Raid and the man who stood at its heart. "How is this possible?" Ethan's voice trembled. Iriston's Tegu was meant to be absolute, yet his malevolent spirit had endured blow after blow and grown stronger because of it. Its destructive force should have ended him. A high-pitched laugh rang out as Brand struck. In an instant, Zhu Tian's body was cleaved in two. "Zhu Tian!" Thorn and Matu cried out in unison. "You good-for-nothing bastard! Activate Shangri-La now!" Ethan seized Scylla by the shoulders. She winced, but met his gaze, understanding that their lives hung in the balance. With a deep, ragged breath, she summoned Shangri-La's power. Brand's gambit became clear. He'd released the 4 Rakshasa ghosts and come straight for Ethan first. The Empire had already gathered every scrap of intelligence. Without Sheila, the ghosts couldn't flee far and would be trapped in this region. They'd eventually be found. But if Brand captured Sheila, she'd vanish, and no one would ever know where to look. "Hateful," Scylla gasped as Brand's blade slammed through her chest with brutal precision. His eyes burned with ruthless intent. "Come rot with me at the end of the world," he snarled. Desperation flared in Sheila's eyes. She slammed her palm against the control seals and activated the dimensional phalanx. "What?" Brand froze. Seizing the moment, Ernest burst from the swirling rose-pink array of the Bagua Yin-Yang fish formation. In an instant, both Brand and Sheila were yanked through the shimmering portal and vanished from the battlefield. When they opened their eyes again, they found themselves on the fringes of existence. Strange imperial satellites drifted past on silent orbits, and unfamiliar stars studded the black expanse. Yet, bewilderingly, both could still breathe and still speak, proof that they'd crossed into some warped pocket dimension. The rift behind them was already collapsing. Brand clutched at its narrowing edge, his nails tearing on the jagged light. A roar of agony ripped from his throat. Ah! Sheila watched in stunned silence. Impossible. No one can resist the power of a spatial array. Back on the original battlefield, Scylla felt her life slipping away. Even so, she managed a proud, blood-soaked smile. Fool. With her final breath, she unleashed one last burst of energy. Boom! The explosion rocked the void, and Brand's scream of pain echoed faintly as though dragged through a nightmare. It felt as if 1,000 blades were carving into his hands and into his very heart, leaving him broken and gasping in the darkness. But I've endured this kind of pain more times than I can count. You're haunted by an evil spirit, the voice roared. Answer me, transcend space once more, and perform a miracle. Ethan poured every ounce of his will into the fabric of reality, squeezing the void with all his strength. The malevolent ghost within him stirred, drawn to his vitality and resolve. It had already begun to fuse with his spirit, merging its darkness into his very flesh. To Sheila's astonished, dilated eyes, the rift in space tore open wider and wider. A deafening roar split the air as a dragon silhouette materialized behind Ethan. Scales burst forth across his body, his form swelling until he stood twice his normal height. More draconic features erupted in rapid succession, clawed hands, ridged spine, and a tail whipping through the air. In moments, Ethan had become a living, pitch-black dragon, the corruption of the evil spirit fueling his newfound strength. The closer he came to the tearing void, the more his toughness and power multiplied. With one final titanic effort, Ethan wrenched himself free of the breach. He tumbled through the rift and emerged on the other side, breathless. Below him, only Sheila's lifeless form drifted, suspended at the edge of oblivion. Beyond her, the other 4 Rakshasa ghosts were locked in fierce battle with Will and Levi, both stripped of their imperial regalia and struggling to hold their ground.